Hello everyone, welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. I know many of you are here to drift gently into sleep. Before you close your eyes, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. The first time I saw grandmother in the garden at night, I thought I was dreaming. I was 7 years old that summer, sent to stay with her while my parents sorted out something they wouldn't explain. The house was old and smelled of lavender and dust, filled with furniture covered in lace doilies and photographs of people I didn't recognize. Grandmother was kind but distant, speaking in soft tones and moving through the house like a ghost herself. The garden was her pride. She spent hours there during the day, tending to roses and hydrangeas, pulling weeds with her gnarled hands, humming songs in a language I didn't understand. It was a beautiful garden, enclosed by a tall hedge that blocked the view from neighboring houses. At the center stood a fountain that no longer worked, its basin full of stagnant water and fallen leaves. On my second night, I woke to a sound, a scratching like fingernails on glass. I sat up in bed, my heart racing in that particular way of childhood fear, when every shadow might contain something terrible. The scratching continued, rhythmic and patient, coming from the window that overlooked the garden. I crept out of bed and peered through the curtain. In the moonlight, I could see the garden clearly, the roses casting long shadows across the grass. And there, at the edge of the lawn, near the hedge, was grandmother. She wore her white nightgown, and her long gray hair hung loose around her shoulders. She was running, not walking, but running, back and forth along the hedge, her movements jerky and strange, like a wound-up toy whose mechanism was broken. I watched for several minutes, my breath fogging the glass. She never looked up at the house. She just ran that same stretch of hedge, over and over, her bare feet silent on the grass. Finally, she stopped, stood perfectly still for a moment, then turned and walked calmly back toward the house. I heard the kitchen door open and close. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and steady, nothing like the frantic running I'd just witnessed. In the morning, I asked her about it. We were having breakfast, toast with jam, tea that was too hot, and I said, "Grandmother, were you in the garden last night?" She looked at me with her pale blue eyes, and for a moment, something flickered across her face, fear, maybe, or warning. Then she smiled, a thin smile that didn't reach those eyes. "You mustn't go into the garden at night," she said. "It's not safe. Promise me you'll stay inside after dark." I promised, though I didn't understand why. The garden was enclosed. There was nothing dangerous there, just flowers and the broken fountain and the tall hedge that separated us from the world. But I kept my promise that night and the next. I stayed in my room after sunset, even when I heard the scratching at the window. Even when I wanted desperately to look and see if she was out there again, running along the hedge with that broken, jerking gait. During the day, grandmother seemed normal. She made meals, watched television, tended to her flowers. She showed me how to deadhead roses, how to pull weeds without disturbing the roots of the plants you wanted to keep. Her hands were gentle with the flowers, careful and loving. But she never explained the rule about the garden, and she never mentioned what I'd seen. On the fourth night, I woke to a different sound. Not scratching, but tapping. A deliberate, measured tapping on the window glass. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. I knew I shouldn't look. I had promised to stay inside, to stay away from the window. But I was 7, and curiosity was stronger than fear. I slipped out of bed and peered through the curtain. Grandmother stood directly beneath my window, looking up. Her face in the moonlight was wrong somehow. The angles were sharp, the shadows too deep. Her mouth was open, and she was mouthing something, words I couldn't hear through the glass. Her hand was raised, one finger extended, tapping against the wall just below my window. Tap, tap, tap. I watched frozen as she gestured toward the garden. She was pointing at something, her movements urgent, insistent. But when I looked where she was pointing, I saw only darkness beneath the hedge, shadows that might have been empty space, or might have been something else. When I looked back down, she was gone. The next morning, she seemed tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled when she poured the tea. I didn't mention the window. I didn't ask any questions. I just ate my toast and tried not to think about the way her face had looked in the moonlight, wrong and sharp and not quite human. The garden is very old, she said suddenly, startling me. She was looking out the kitchen window at her flowers, her expression distant. It was here before the house. Did you know that? People used to leave offerings at the fountain long ago, flowers and food and other things. What kind of other things? I asked. She didn't answer. She just sipped her tea and continued staring out the window, as if she could see something there that I couldn't. That afternoon, I explored the garden while she napped. I walked the paths between the flower beds, touched the soft petals of roses, listened to the bees humming among the lavender. Everything seemed peaceful and normal. The hedge was just a hedge, tall and thick, with no gaps large enough to see through. The fountain was just an old fountain, its basin filled with murky water that reflected the sky. But there was something underneath the normalcy. A feeling, a sense that the garden was watching me, just as intently as I was observing it. I found myself moving slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might trigger some response I didn't want to witness. Near the fountain, I discovered something I'd missed before. Carved into the stone basin, barely visible beneath the moss and grime, were symbols. They looked like letters, but weren't from any alphabet I'd learned in school. They curved and spiraled, interconnected in ways that hurt to look at for too long. I reached out to touch them, but a hand grabbed my wrist. Grandmother. I hadn't heard her come up behind me. Her grip was strong, stronger than seemed possible for someone so old and frail. "Don't touch," she said. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "Never touch the fountain. Never drink from it. Never put anything in the water. Do you understand?" I nodded, frightened by the intensity in her eyes. She released my wrist and stepped back, her expression softening. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you, but the rules are important. Stay inside at night. Don't touch the fountain. Don't play near the hedge." She paused, looking at me carefully. "And if you see me in the garden after dark, don't open your window. Don't let me in, no matter what I say or do." "But why?" I whispered. "Because," she said slowly, "the thing that walks the garden at night isn't always me." She left me standing there, alone with the fountain and the flowers and the tall hedge that enclosed everything. I didn't go back inside immediately. I stood there, trying to process what she'd said, trying to understand. The thing that walks the garden at night. Not always me. At night, I was determined to stay awake. I wanted to see, to understand what was happening. I lay in bed with the curtains closed, listening. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around midnight, I heard it. The kitchen door opening. The soft tread of feet on the path outside. I got up and carefully opened the curtain, just a crack. Grandmother was in the garden again, but this time she wasn't running. She was standing at the fountain, both hands gripping the stone edge, her head bowed as if in prayer or exhaustion. I watched as she slowly raised her head. Her face turned toward my window, and even from that distance, I could see that something was wrong. Her eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's eyes, bright and empty. Her mouth opened, wider than it should have been able to, and she made a sound, low and keening, not quite human. Then she started moving toward the house. Not walking, but crawling. On all fours, her movements quick and skittering like an insect. She crossed the lawn in seconds and stopped directly below my window. I heard her voice, but it wasn't coming from the garden. It was coming from inside the house, from the hallway outside my room. "Let me in," the voice said. It sounded like grandmother, but wrong, the pitch slightly off, the words too precise. "I'm cold. Please let me in." I backed away from the window, my heart hammering. The doorknob to my room began to turn, slowly, testing. I had locked it before bed, following an instinct I hadn't understood until now. "Please," the voice said again. "I'm your grandmother. Why won't you let me in?" I stood in the center of the room, shaking, watching the doorknob turn back and forth, back and forth. This continued for what felt like hours, but might have been only minutes. Then, abruptly it stopped. Silence. I waited, barely breathing, for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, exhausted, I crawled back into bed, still fully dressed, and somehow fell asleep. In the morning, grandmother was at the breakfast table as usual. She looked terrible. Her face was gaunt, her skin pale, and there were scratches on her arms that she hadn't tried to hide. "Did you stay inside?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Good. She touched one of the scratches absently. It gets harder every night. It wants in more desperately. Soon, I won't be able to keep it out at all. What is it? I asked. What's happening to you? She was quiet for a long time, staring at her tea. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. When I was young, younger than you are now, I found something in the garden. Something old, buried beneath the fountain. I shouldn't have touched it, shouldn't have taken it, but I was curious. I wanted to know what it was. She paused, her hands trembling around the teacup. It bound itself to me, to this place. It lives in the garden now, and at night it tries to come inside. It wears my shape, uses my voice. It knows everything I know, feels everything I feel. But it's not me. It's something else. Something that's been waiting for a very long time. Waiting for what? She looked at me then, and I saw tears in her pale eyes. For someone to invite it in. For someone to open a door or a window and let it cross the threshold. Once it's inside, it can stay. It can replace me entirely, become me, and I'll be the one trapped out there in the garden, running along the hedge, trying to find a way back. I felt cold all over. Has it ever gotten in? Once, she said. 20 years ago, my daughter, your mother, was visiting with her husband. She heard me calling, or thought she did, and opened the kitchen door. It came in. For 3 days, it lived in the house, wearing my skin, speaking with my voice. No one knew the difference except me. I was trapped in the garden, watching it move through my life. How did you get back? It made a mistake. It forgot something only I would know. The name of your mother's childhood doll. Your mother realized something was wrong. She wouldn't let it near her, wouldn't trust it. Eventually, it grew frustrated and went back to the garden. I was able to return, but it was harder that time. A piece of me stayed out there. As she touched her face, her neck, as if checking that she was still real. That's why your mother doesn't visit anymore. She knows. She's afraid it will happen again, and next time, I might not be able to come back at all. We sat in silence for a while. I wanted to ask more questions, but I didn't know where to start. Finally, I said, "What should I do? What you've been doing? Stay inside at night. Keep your door locked. Don't listen to anything that sounds like me after dark." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was cold. "You're only here for another week. You can manage that, can't you?" I nodded, but I felt the weight of those days ahead of me like a stone in my stomach. That night, it started before sunset. I was in my room, reading when I heard scratching at the window. It was still light outside, the sun just beginning to set, but there she was, grandmother in the garden, pressing her face against the glass, her breath fogging it. "Let me in," she said, her voice muffled. "It's still daytime. You can let me in during the day." But I remembered what the real grandmother had said. "Don't open the window. Don't let me in. No matter what." The thing outside smiled, and the smile was wrong, too wide. revealing too many teeth. "Smart boy," it said. "But it doesn't matter. I'm getting stronger. Soon, I won't need an invitation." It pulled back from the window and began to change. I watched in horror as its form shifted, the proportions of its body becoming elongated, inhuman. Its fingers stretched into claws, its jaw distended, and that smile grew wider and wider until its face seemed to be nothing but teeth and darkness. Then it turned and skittered away across the garden, moving with that horrible insect, like Gate, disappearing into the shadows beneath the hedge. I found Grandmother in her room, lying on her bed with her eyes closed. For a terrible moment, I thought she was dead. But when I touched her hand, she opened her eyes. "It's getting stronger," she whispered. "Because you're here. Children make it stronger. They're more impressionable, more likely to believe, to trust. It feeds on that. What can we do? Survive," she said. "Just survive until you leave. Then it will be weaker again, and I can hold it off for another season." But that night, things escalated. I woke to find my doorknob turning again, that voice in the hallway, pleading and desperate. But this time, there were other voices too. Children's voices calling to me, asking me to come play in the garden. "We're lonely," they said. "Come play with us. The garden is so beautiful at night. You're missing everything." I covered my ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside my head as much as from outside my door. "Your grandmother is sleeping," the voices said. "She won't know if you just look. Just open the curtain and look. See how beautiful it is." I squeezed my eyes shut, but curiosity pulled at me like a physical force. Just a look. What harm could come from just looking? I found myself at the window before I fully realized I'd moved. My hand was on the curtain, ready to pull it aside. "That's right," the voices cooed. "Just look. Just see." Something made me stop. A memory of Grandmother's scratched arms, her hollow eyes, the way she moved through the house like she was only partly there. I stepped back from the window, back to my bed, and buried myself under the covers. The voices grew angry then. They shouted and pleaded and threatened. They told me terrible things I won't repeat, things no child should hear. But I didn't move. I stayed under the covers until dawn, shaking and crying silently, waiting for the night to end. In the morning, the house was quiet, too quiet. I found Grandmother in the kitchen, making breakfast as usual, but she moved stiffly, mechanically. When she turned to look at me, I saw that her eyes were different, darker, wrong. "Good morning," she said, and the voice was almost right, but not quite. I ran. Out of the kitchen, through the house, but all the doors were locked. The windows wouldn't open. I was trapped inside with this thing that wore Grandmother's shape. It followed me slowly, patiently, as I ran from room to room. "Where are you going?" it asked in that almost right voice. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? To understand? To know." I ended up in the bathroom, the only door I could lock from the inside. I huddled in the bathtub, waiting, praying. Time passed strangely. I couldn't tell if it had been hours or minutes. Then I heard a different voice. The real grandmother, faint and far away, calling from outside. "Fight it," she was saying. "Don't believe what you see. Come to the garden." The thing outside the bathroom door laughed. "She wants you in the garden. That's where I'm strongest. If you go out there, you'll never come back." I didn't know what to believe. Both voices sounded true. Both sounded false. I was trapped between them, paralyzed by uncertainty. Then I remembered something. The doll's name, the Tess grandmother had told me about. I called through the door. What was my mother's doll called? Silence. Then, I don't remember things like that. I'm old. My memory isn't what it was. But the real grandmother would have remembered. She'd told me that was how my mother had known the difference. The thing in the house wasn't her. I climbed out of the bathtub and opened the bathroom window. It was small, but I was small too. I squeezed through and dropped into the garden below, landing hard on the grass. The real grandmother was there, waiting. She looked terrible, transparent almost, fading. "Run," she said. "Run to the fountain and don't look back." I ran. Behind me. I heard the kitchen door burst open, heard something large and terrible scrambling across the garden in pursuit. Grandmother, the real one, placed herself in its path, and I heard them collide, heard her scream. I reached the fountain and stopped, not knowing what else to do. The water in the basin was churning now, dark and thick. The symbols carved in the stone were glowing faintly. "Put your hand in." Grandmother's voice called weakly. "End it. Please. I'm so tired." I looked at the water, at those glowing symbols, and I understood. This was how it had started. With someone touching what shouldn't be touched. This was how it could end. I plunged my hand into the water. The garden exploded into light. I heard screaming, multiple voices, children and adults, all crying out in release or rage. The water pulled at my hand, tried to drag me down, but I pulled back, yanked myself free. When I opened my eyes, the garden was burning with cold fire. The hedge was ablaze with it. The flowers were consumed by it. And the thing that had been chasing me was dissolving, breaking apart into shadows that the fire devoured. Grandmother was lying on the grass. I ran to her, and she opened her eyes, her real eyes pale and clear. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's over now. The binding is broken. She was right." I could feel it. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on the garden was gone. The air felt lighter. The shadows were just shadows. My parents came to get me the next day. Grandmother seemed more solid, more present than she had since I'd arrived. The scratches on her arms were healing. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. The garden needs to be destroyed, she told my parents. Torn up, paved over. Whatever was buried there is gone now. But the memory remains. This place shouldn't exist anymore. They thought she was getting senile, making strange requests. But they humored her. After I left, they arranged for the garden to be removed, the fountain demolished, the hedge torn out. I'm older now, much older. I have children of my own, and sometimes, late at night, I think about that summer. I think about grandmother and the thing in the garden, about the children's voices calling to me, about the cold fire that consumed everything. Grandmother lived for many years after that summer, happier and more peaceful than she'd been in decades. She moved to a small apartment with no garden, and she never grew flowers again. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear scratching at my window, and sometimes I hear children's voices calling to me from outside, asking me to come play. I never open the curtains. I never look, because I know that some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some gardens, once planted, can never truly be destroyed. They just wait, patient and hungry for another child to visit, another hand to reach into the water, another chance to cross the threshold from darkness into light. Story 2. I never believed in ghosts until I inherited my grandfather's camera. It arrived in a weathered leather case, the kind that smells of old books and forgotten attics. The camera itself was a vintage Rolleiflex, its twin lenses staring up at me like curious eyes. My grandfather had been a photographer, obsessive about his craft, spending hours in his darkroom developing images that no one else seemed to appreciate. When he died, he left me everything: the camera, his darkroom equipment, and boxes upon boxes of photographs. I set up his old enlarger in my basement, converting the space into a makeshift darkroom. The red safe light cast everything in a crimson glow, and I found myself spending evenings there, away from the blue light of screens, developing film the old-fashioned way. There was something meditative about watching images slowly emerge in the developing tray, like memories surfacing from deep water. The first photograph I developed was a test shot, just my living room, the afternoon light streaming through the curtains. I hung the print to dry and went upstairs for dinner. When I returned an hour later, I noticed something odd. In the corner of the photograph, near the bookshelf, there was a blur, a shadow, perhaps, or a trick of the light. I assumed it was a development error, something I'd fix with practice. The second photograph was of the park near my apartment. I'd taken it on a Sunday morning, the trees golden with autumn. When I pulled it from the developing tray, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, standing behind a tree in the background, was a figure. It was indistinct, almost transparent, but undeniably human-shaped. I could make out what might have been a coat, arms hanging at its sides, and something that could have been a face turned toward the camera. I told myself it was someone I hadn't noticed when I took the shot. People walk through parks. It was perfectly normal. But I had been alone that morning. I remembered it clearly. The unusual emptiness. The way my footsteps had been the only sound on the gravel path. I developed more photographs over the following weeks. A street corner at dusk, the local library, the coffee shop I frequented. Each one contained a figure. Sometimes it was in the background, barely visible. Sometimes it was closer, clearer. The figure never faced away from the camera. It was always turned toward me, watching through the lens across time. I began to recognize details. The figure wore what looked like an old-fashioned coat, dark and long. Its hands were always visible, hanging loosely, fingers slightly curled. The face remained indistinct, but I could sense eyes watching from that blur of features. I stopped taking photographs for 3 days. I needed to think, to rationalize. Perhaps there was something wrong with the camera, some defect in the lens causing light to refract in unusual ways. Perhaps the film was damaged, or my developing chemicals were contaminated. On the 4th day, I couldn't resist. I loaded a fresh roll of film, checked the camera meticulously, and took a single photograph of my bedroom. Just my bedroom, in the middle of the day, every corner visible and empty. That night, I developed it with hands that wouldn't quite steady. The image emerged slowly, my bed, my dresser, my window with its pale curtains. And there, standing at the foot of my bed, was the figure, closer than it had ever been. I could almost make out the texture of its coat, the way shadows pooled, where its eyes should be. I destroyed that photograph, tearing it into pieces and washing the fragments down the drain. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The figure had been in my bedroom, or would be, or had always been there, invisible until captured by my grandfather's camera. I researched the camera's history, tracking down forums of vintage photography enthusiasts. I learned that my grandfather had been something of a legend in certain circles, though not for his artistic talent. People whispered about his photographs, about the things that appeared in them. Some said he'd been trying to photograph death itself. Others claimed he'd been attempting to document spirits, to prove the existence of another world, pressing against our own. I found an old interview he'd given to a paranormal magazine in the 70s. "The camera doesn't lie," he'd said. "It shows us what's really there, what we train ourselves not to see. The dead don't leave us. They linger in the spaces between moments, and the camera, the right camera, can catch them there. I should have stopped using it. I should have locked it away, or sold it, or destroyed it. But I didn't. I kept photographing, kept developing, driven by a compulsion I didn't fully understand. Each photograph brought the figure closer. It moved through my images like it was walking toward me across time, step by inevitable step. In one photograph, I could see its eyes. They were dark, hollow places that seemed to look through the print and into me. In another, I could see its mouth, or the shadow of a mouth, slightly open as if about to speak. I began to notice something else. The backgrounds of my photographs were changing. Not just the figure moving forward, but the world around it growing darker. Shadows deepened. Light seemed to dim. Colors faded to shades of gray and black. It was as if the figure's presence was draining the world of life, of warmth, of reality itself. I took a photograph of myself, using the timer function sitting in my living room. When I developed it, I almost dropped the tray. The figure was behind me, its hands raised, hovering just above my shoulders. In the photograph, my face was turned slightly, as if I could sense it there, as if some part of me knew I wasn't alone. That night, I lay in bed and felt the temperature drop. I heard sounds, soft, like footsteps on carpet, like breathing that wasn't my own. I kept my eyes closed, terrified of what I might see if I opened them. I told myself it was my imagination, that photographs couldn't bring ghosts into the real world. But I knew better. Every photograph I took was a bridge, a connection between the visible and invisible. I was documenting something that wanted to be seen, that was using my camera to cross over from wherever it existed into my world. I loaded the camera with the last roll of film I had. My hands shook as I stood in my living room, in the exact spot where I'd taken that first photograph weeks ago. I raised the camera and took a picture of the empty air in front of me. In the darkroom, I developed it with a sense of awful inevitability. The image emerged, and I saw the figure standing directly before me, close enough that I could see every detail. The coat was tattered, ancient. The face was becoming clearer, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with eyes that were windows into nothing. And its hands reaching forward, reaching through the photograph, reaching toward me. Behind it, I could see my living room, but it was wrong. The walls were stained and decaying. The furniture was covered in dust. The windows were dark, as if night had fallen permanently. It was my apartment, but transformed into something else, somewhere else. I understood then what my grandfather had been doing all those years. He hadn't been photographing ghosts. He'd been documenting the overlay, the other world that exists in the same space as ours, separated by the thinnest of veils. The camera could see through that veil. And by looking through the camera, by capturing those images, I had been thinning the veil even further. I left the photograph in the developing tray and went upstairs. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind against the windows, sounded like footsteps, like something moving through my home, searching. In the morning, I went to the basement. The photograph had dried on its own, curled slightly at the edges. I picked it up and held it to the light. The figure was still there, but something had changed. The background was different. It was no longer my living room as it had been. It was my living room as it was now. This morning's light, today's arrangement of books on the shelf. The photograph I had developed last night was now showing today. I heard a sound behind me, a soft footfall on the basement stairs. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The stairs were empty, but the temperature was dropping, and I could see my breath misting in the air. I looked back at the photograph. The figure had moved. It was no longer in the center of the frame. It was at the edge, as if it had turned to look at something outside the bounds of the image. As if it had turned to look at me. I set the photograph down carefully and backed away from it. I climbed the stairs, left the basement, and locked the door behind me. I could leave, I thought. I could pack a bag and go, abandon this place and everything in it. But where would I go? I had taken photographs everywhere. The park, the library, the coffee shop, the streets I walked. The figure was in all of them now, connected to all those places through the images I had created. And those images were connected to me. I sat at my kitchen table as the sun set, watching shadows lengthen across the floor. I had my grandfather's camera in front of me. I hadn't loaded it with film. I didn't need to. I understood now that the camera was just a tool, a way of seeing. The real connection was already made. That night, I saw it for the first time without the camera. I woke at 3 in the morning. That dead hour when the world is at its quietest, and it was standing at the foot of my bed, exactly where it had been in the photograph. The same pose, the same tattered coat, the same hollow eyes. We looked at each other for a long moment. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen, held by that gaze. And slowly, I began to understand. It wasn't trying to frighten me. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It had been photographed so many times by my grandfather, captured again and again over decades, until it became bound to the camera, to the act of seeing, to being seen. And now I had continued that process. Each photograph had been an invitation, a recognition. I had acknowledged its existence, and in doing so, I had made it more real, more present. It raised one hand slowly, and I saw that it was pointing. Not at me, but at the camera on my dresser. It wanted to be photographed again. I reached for the camera, my movements feeling dreamlike, distant from my will. I looked through the viewfinder, and through that lens, the figure became clearer than ever. I could see details now that had been hidden. The pattern of buttons on its coat, the texture of what might once have been skin, the infinite depth of those hollow eyes. I pressed the shutter. The click echoed in the silent room. The figure didn't move. It stood there, still pointing at the camera, and I realized it wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Each photograph was a step closer, a further blurring of the line between its world and mine. I have developed that last photograph. I keep it with all the others now, a collection that grows heavier every time I look at it. In the most recent image, the figure is reaching toward the camera, toward me. Its fingers are inches from the lens. I don't know what will happen when it finally crosses completely. Perhaps I will fade into the photographs as it emerges from them. A trade of places, one existence swapping with another. Perhaps we will both exist in that gray space between worlds, neither fully present nor fully absent. I still have the camera. I take photographs occasionally, though I try not to. The compulsion is strong, like an addiction, like hunger. And in each new photograph, the figure is there, closer than before, more solid, more real. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I feel its presence beside me. Not threatening, not violent, just there, watching, waiting, patient as only something that has existed outside of time can be patient. I think my grandfather knew this would happen. I think he spent years trying to document what he'd unleashed, trying to understand it, trying perhaps to warn whoever came after him. But some knowledge can't be communicated in words. It has to be experienced, seen, captured through a lens that shows more than reality allows. Tonight, I will take one more photograph. I can feel the necessity of it pulling at me like gravity. The camera is already loaded with film. I just need to press the shutter, develop the image, and see how much closer it has come. And someday soon, I will take the last photograph. The one where the figure is no longer in the background, no longer behind me or beside me. The photograph where I see, finally, what it looks like when it's standing in the same space, the same moment, the same world as me. I wonder if anyone will be able to tell the difference between us once that moment comes. I wonder if they'll know which shadow is mine and which belongs to the thing that has been walking toward me through every photograph I've ever taken. The camera is waiting. The film is ready. And somewhere in the space between what can be seen and what can only be captured, the figure is taking its next step forward. All I have to do is look through the lens. One more time. Story 3. Marcus and I had been walking the park at night since high school. It was our tradition, our ritual. Every Thursday around 11, when the paths were empty and the street lights cast everything in amber and shadow, we'd meet at the west entrance and walk the circuit. We'd talk about life, about work, about nothing important. It was comfortable, familiar, safe, until the night we saw it. We were halfway through our usual route, passing through the section where the trees grow thick and the streetlights are farther apart. Marcus was telling me about some problem at work, something about a coworker and a deadline, and I was half listening, watching our shadows stretch and contract as we passed under the lights. That's when I noticed it. A third shadow. It was walking parallel to us, just off the path, moving through the trees. At first, I thought it was another person, someone else out for a late walk. But there was something wrong about the way it moved. The shadow was too tall, too thin, and its movements were slightly out of sync with ours. Not quite matching our pace, not quite following the same rhythm. I stopped walking. Marcus stopped too, mid-sentence.
"What?"
he asked.
"Do you see that?"
I pointed toward the trees. He looked, and I watched his face change as he saw it. The shadow was still moving, continuing along its path, even though we had stopped. It was dark, impossibly dark, darker than the spaces between the trees, as if it absorbed light rather than simply blocking it. "Someone's over there," Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain. We both knew it wasn't someone. The shadow had no source. There was no figure casting it, no body between the streetlights and the ground. It was just the shadow itself, autonomous and moving, gliding between the trees with purpose. It stopped when it was directly across from us. We stood there, frozen, watching it. It seemed to be watching us too, though it had no eyes, no face, nothing that suggested awareness. Yet we both felt its attention, focused and intent. "We should go," I said. Marcus nodded, but neither of us moved. We were caught in that paralysis of fear, unable to look away from the shadow, unable to convince our bodies to flee. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, the shadow moved again. It turned, a smooth, flowing motion, and began to walk away, deeper into the trees. We watched it go until the darkness swallowed it completely. "What the hell was that?" Marcus whispered. I didn't have an answer. We hurried through the rest of the park, neither of us speaking, both of us checking the trees constantly, watching for that impossible shadow. We saw nothing else unusual. When we reached the exit, we stood under the bright streetlights, reluctant to part, reluctant to acknowledge what we'd seen. Maybe it was just, I don't know, a trick of the light, Marcus said, but he didn't believe it any more than I did. We agreed to meet the following Thursday as usual, though both of us knew we wouldn't come. Some traditions should be broken. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow moving through the trees, felt its attention on me. Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted off, exhausted. I dreamed I was back in the park. It was darker than it had been in reality, the streetlights dim and flickering. I was alone, walking the familiar path. But I couldn't stop. My legs moved without my conscious control, carrying me forward through the amber light and shadow. The shadow was there, waiting in the trees. But now there were more of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, standing among the trunks, their forms blurred and indistinct, but undeniably present. They were watching me walk past, their attention pressing against me like weight. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I could only walk, step after step, while the shadows watched. One of them stepped onto the path ahead of me. I was walking directly toward it, unable to change direction. As I got closer, I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The shadow had texture, like smoke or fog, constantly moving within itself. And deep within that darkness, there were things, shapes that might have been bones, or branches, or something else entirely. I walked into it, through it, and everything went cold. The darkness swallowed me, and I felt something. Presence, intelligence, hunger, not for food, but for something else, for attention, for acknowledgement, for being seen. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat. It was dawn, light streaming through my window. I told myself it was just a nightmare brought on by what we'd seen. Nothing more. But that day at work, I couldn't concentrate. I kept seeing shadows in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes that weren't quite there when I looked directly at them. I called Marcus during lunch. "I had the worst nightmare," I said. "About the park." His voice was tense. "Yeah." "Did you?" "Same," he interrupted. "I dreamed about it too. About the shadows." Plural. We were both quiet for a moment. Then Marcus said, "We didn't imagine it. What we saw was real." But I knew he was right, but I didn't want to accept it. Real meant There were things in the world that shouldn't exist. Things that violated the comfortable rules I'd built my life around. That night, the dreams came again. And the night after. And the night after that. Always the same. Walking through the dark park. Surrounded by watching shadows. That terrible sense of being observed by something vast and unknowable. I started avoiding shadows during the day. I kept lights on constantly. I walked on the sunny side of streets. People at work noticed, asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine. Marcus was having the same experience. We talked every day now, comparing notes, trying to understand. The dreams were becoming more detailed. We could see patterns in the shadows, almost like writing. We could hear sounds, whispers that might have been wind, or might have been voices. It wants something from us. Marcus said one evening. We were on the phone. Neither of us would agree to meet in person anymore. Don't ask me how I know, but I'm certain. It showed itself to us for a reason. What could it possibly want? To be seen, he said simply. To be acknowledged. It's been there all along, in the park, in the shadows everywhere, and we walk past every day without noticing. But we saw it. We looked directly at it, and now it won't let us forget. I thought about this. So what do we do? I don't know. But I don't think we can just ignore it. I don't think it will let us. He was right. The dreams were getting worse, more vivid. I was sleeping less, and when I did sleep, I woke exhausted, as if I'd been walking all night. I started to notice marks on my shoes. Dirt and grass stains, even though I hadn't been outside. Marcus called me on a Tuesday, his voice shaking. I woke up outside last night, in my yard. I don't remember going out there. I was just standing there, looking toward the direction of the park. Jesus, Marcus. It's taking us back, he said, slowly, night by night. It's pulling us back to the park. We have to go. We have to confront it, whatever it is, or we'll end up walking there in our sleep one night and never come back. I knew he was right. The alternative was to slowly lose ourselves, to become sleepwalkers drawn inevitably toward that dark place, toward those waiting shadows. We agreed to return to the park the following Thursday. 1 week to prepare, to steel ourselves, to accept what we were about to do. That week was the longest of my life. The dreams continued, but now they felt almost anticipatory, as if the shadows knew we were coming back. I researched shadows, folklore about darkness and shade, looking for some explanation or protection. I found stories from every culture, shadow people, shadow walkers, the dark that moves. Always the same basic elements, shadows, that detach from their sources, darkness with consciousness, things that exist in the spaces between light. Most of the stories agreed on one point: you couldn't fight shadows. They had no substance to strike, no weakness to exploit. The only power over them was in not acknowledging them, in refusing to see. But we'd already seen. We'd already acknowledged them. That door couldn't be unclosed. Thursday came. Marcus and I met at the west entrance at 11, just like always. The park looked the same as it always had. Amber streetlights, deep shadows between them, paths that wound through trees and past empty playgrounds. But now it felt different, malevolent, waiting.
We don't have to do this,
I said, even though I knew we did. Marcus shook his head. Yes, we do.
Come on.
We walked. The familiar route felt strange now. Every shadow suspect, every patch of darkness potentially alive. We didn't talk. We just walked, waiting. We were approaching the section where we'd first seen it when Marcus grabbed my arm. There, he whispered. The shadow was waiting in the trees, exactly where it had been before. But we could see it more clearly now. It wasn't just an absence of light. It had form, structure. It looked almost human, but stretched and elongated, as if someone had taken a person's shadow and pulled it like taffy. And we could see its face now, or where a face should be. Features that were constantly shifting, forming and dissolving, creating something that might have been eyes, a mouth, a nose, before collapsing back into smooth darkness. It stepped onto the path. We stopped walking. What do you want? Marcus called out. His voice shook, but he got the words out. The shadow didn't respond, at least not in any way we could hear. But I felt something. A pressure in my head, like the beginnings of a migraine, and with it came images. The park as it had been. Years ago, decades ago, centuries ago. Always with the shadows, always with these dark figures moving between the trees. Watching the paths, observing the people who walked there. They had always been here. Not ghosts, not spirits, but something else. Something that existed in the gaps of human perception. In the corners of vision, in the moments between glances, more shadows emerged from the trees. Dozens of them surrounding us on all sides. We were trapped in a circle of living darkness, unable to run, unable to do anything but stand and watch as they moved closer. Please, I said, though I didn't know what I was asking for. The closest shadow reached out. Its hand, if you could call it a hand, extended toward me. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. The shadow's touch was cold, so cold it burned, and when it made contact with my arm, I felt something shift inside me. I saw then what it wanted us to see. The world as they experienced it. A place of brightness and noise, where solid beings moved through their realm without acknowledgement, without respect. We were the intruders, stumbling through their space with our light, and our sound, and our refusal to admit they existed. They didn't want to hurt us. They wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have their existence validated by the beings who shared their space, but pretended they weren't there. Marcus was experiencing the same thing. I could see the shadow touching him, see the understanding dawning on his face. We see you, Marcus said. His voice was clear, stronger now. We acknowledge you. You're real. You exist. The pressure in my head intensified, but it wasn't painful anymore. It felt almost grateful. The shadows around us shifted, their forms becoming more defined, more solid. They weren't threatening. They were simply present, finally allowed to be fully present, after centuries of being ignored. One by one, they stepped back, melting into the darkness between the trees. The shadow that had touched us lingered for a moment longer, and I felt a final pulse of that alien intelligence, a sense of satisfaction maybe, or completion. Then it too was gone, and Marcus and I stood alone on the path. We walked home slowly, processing what had happened. The park felt different now. Not dangerous, but alive in a way it hadn't been before. We could sense them still, the shadows, moving in their spaces, existing in their way. But the oppressive feeling was gone. They had been acknowledged. That should have been the end of it. We had done what they wanted. We had seen them, admitted they were real. But that night, I dreamed again. I was in my bedroom, lying in bed, trying to sleep. And I realized there were shadows in the room that didn't match the furniture, didn't correspond to any light source. They were standing around my bed, silent and still, watching me sleep. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to wake up, but I was awake. This wasn't a dream. This was real. The shadows weren't confined to the park. They were everywhere. They had always been everywhere. In every room, every street, every space where light created darkness. And now that we'd acknowledged them, now that we'd opened ourselves to seeing them, we would always see them. I sat up slowly, my heart racing. The shadows didn't move. They just watched, patient and eternal. I counted them, 5 in my room, standing in the corners, by the closet, near the door. How long had they been there? How long had they been watching me sleep? Watching me live my life, invisible and ignored. I reached for my phone and called Marcus. He answered immediately. "You see them too," he said. It wasn't a question. "Everywhere," I whispered. "Yeah." We stayed on the phone for hours, neither of us willing to hang up, both of us needing the connection to another human being who understood. We talked about what we'd done, about the choice we'd made in the park. We had acknowledged the shadows because we thought it would make them leave us alone. But instead, we'd opened a door in our perception that could never be closed. "Do you think they're dangerous?" I asked as dawn began to break. The shadows in my room were fading with the light, becoming less distinct. "I don't think so," Marcus said. "They're not malevolent. They're just there. They've always been there. We just refused to see them before." "I want to refuse again," I said. "I want to go back to not seeing." "I don't think we can." He was right. In the days and weeks that followed, we learned to live with our new awareness. The shadows were always present, always watching. In crowded rooms, they stood among the people. On busy streets, they moved through the crowds. In empty buildings, they filled the spaces, observing, existing. We tried to tell others, but no one believed us. How could they? "You can't see shadows that way," they said. "You're imagining things. Shadows don't have consciousness. They're just absence of light." But we knew better. And slowly, we began to notice others who could see them too. People who would stop suddenly on the street, staring at nothing. People who would avoid certain corners, certain rooms, without understanding why. People who slept with lights on and couldn't explain the anxiety that darkness brought. They were like us. They had somehow opened themselves to seeing, and now they couldn't close their eyes again. Marcus and I still talk every day. We compare notes, discuss patterns we've noticed in the shadows' behavior. They have routines, preferences. Some shadows stay in one place for days. Others move constantly. Some seem curious about humans. Others ignore us completely. We've learned to coexist with them, these beings that share our space. We acknowledge them when they come close, a simple nod or a whisper of recognition. They seem to appreciate this. They don't press us close anymore, don't crowd around us in the night. But I wonder sometimes what would happen if everyone could see them. If all of humanity suddenly became aware of these dark inhabitants that move through our world, watching and waiting and existing in the spaces we pretend are empty. Would we adapt, as Marcus and I have? Or would the knowledge break us? I don't know. What I do know is that I can never walk through a park at night without seeing them now. I can never sit in a dark room without feeling their presence. I am always watched, always observed, always sharing my space with intelligences I don't fully understand. Sometimes I see children staring at shadows with curious expressions, their heads tilted, their eyes tracking movements that adults insist aren't there. And I wonder if children can see them naturally before they learn not to, before they're taught that shadows are just shadows, nothing more. I want to warn those children, to tell them to look away, to close that door before it opens too far. But I never do. Who am I to deny them the truth? Who am I to insist they join us in our comfortable blindness? Marcus asked me the other day if I regret what we did, if I wish we'd never walked through the park that night, never seen the first shadow. I didn't have an answer. The truth is complicated. Yes, I miss the simplicity of not knowing. I miss sleeping without awareness, walking without caution, existing without the constant presence of watchers. But I also know things now. I understand that the world is more complex than I imagined, that existence has more layers than we acknowledge, and there's something in that knowledge, however uncomfortable, that feels important. Essential, even. The shadows are still there. Right now, as you hear these words, they're around you too. In the corners of rooms, in the spaces between objects, in every patch of darkness that your eyes slide over without really seeing. They're watching. They're waiting. They've always been there. You just haven't acknowledged them yet, but maybe you will. Maybe tonight, when you're lying in bed, you'll notice a shadow that doesn't quite match. Maybe tomorrow, walking down a familiar street, you'll catch movement in your peripheral vision. Something that disappears when you look directly at it. But you'll know it was there. And once you acknowledge it, once you admit to yourself that you've seen it, everything changes. The door opens. And you can never close it again. I hope, for your sake, that you can keep your eyes averted. I hope you can maintain the comfortable fiction that shadows are simple, empty, lifeless things. But if you can't, Story 4. The water pressure gauge read 312 feet as I descended along the anchor line. Every breath came as a mechanized hiss and bubble. In, out, in, out. The rhythm that kept me alive down here in the crushing darkness. My dive light cut a pale cone through the murk, illuminating particles that drifted like snow in a globe someone had shaken. I was alone. That was my first mistake. Marcus was supposed to be my dive buddy, but he'd gotten food poisoning the night before. Professional protocol said to postpone. But we'd been searching for the SS Meridian for 6 weeks, and the weather window was closing. The wreck sat at the edge of recreational diving limits, just barely within reach for someone with my training and experience, and I'd found it. The sonar reading yesterday had been unmistakable. A large vessel, approximately 400 feet long, resting at 335 feet. The Meridian had gone down in 1943 with all hands. 278 souls lost. No survivors. No bodies ever recovered. The official report said engine fire, but rumors spoke of something else. Something the Navy had quietly classified and forgotten. I should have waited for Marcus. The anchor line disappeared beneath me into deeper darkness. I checked my computer 320 feet. The pressure was immense now, the weight of an entire column of ocean pressing against my body. My wetsuit compressed against my skin. Each breath took more effort. Nitrogen narcosis lurked at these depths, ready to muddle thinking, create strange euphoria or paranoia. Stay focused, I told myself. Down, document, up, simple. At 330 feet, the anchor line ended, secured to a massive piece of rusted metal. I swept my light across it. Hull plating, still painted navy gray beneath layers of marine growth. My heart rate increased, breath quickening. This was it. The Meridian. The wreck loomed before me like a metal cathedral. The ship had landed on its side, creating a wall of steel that extended up into the darkness above and down into the abyss below. Portholes gaped like empty eye sockets. A doorway yawned open, revealing only blackness within. I began my survey, swimming slowly along the hull, filming with my GoPro, taking mental notes. The ship was remarkably intact. Whatever had sunk her hadn't blown her apart. No torpedo damage visible, no catastrophic rupture. Just a ship that had stopped, settled, died. That's when I saw the first hand. It emerged from a porthole pale and waving gently in the current. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought someone else was down here. Then my light caught the details. Too pale, covered in growth. Bones visible through translucent skin. Not a hand reaching out. A hand still attached to something inside the wreck. I forced myself to shine my light directly into the porthole. A face stared back. My regulator nearly fell from my mouth. The face was intact, impossibly preserved, eyes open and looking directly at me. A young man, maybe 20, frozen in an expression I couldn't read. Not fear exactly. More like waiting. I checked my depth gauge, my air supply, my nitrogen load. all the numbers that mattered. I had 20 minutes at this depth before I needed to begin my ascent, but my hands were shaking. Nitrogen narcosis, I told myself. Seeing things. The pressure playing tricks. I moved on, following the hole toward the stern. More portholes. More faces. Dozens of them, all watching. All preserved in that impossible way, as if the ship had sunk yesterday instead of 80 years ago. This wasn't right. Bodies didn't preserve like this. They decomposed, were consumed by sea life, scattered by currents. But these looked like they were merely sleeping, waiting. The word echoed in my mind. Waiting. A sound filtered through the water. Not the mechanical sounds of my own breathing and bubbles, but something else. A low vibration, almost musical. It resonated in my chest, making my heart stutter. I needed to leave. Every instinct screamed it. But I was a professional. I'd come to document the wreck, and I had 10 minutes left before I needed to start up. The stern section was partially collapsed, creating a gap large enough to swim through. Against all judgment, I entered. Inside the wreck, my light revealed a corridor, surprisingly clear. Silt covered everything in a thick carpet, but the structure was sound. Doors hung open at odd angles. Pipes and cables dangled from the ceiling. And down the corridor, in the distance, something moved. I froze, equalizing my ears against the pressure, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Nothing should be moving down here. No large sea life would inhabit a wreck at this depth. Not enough oxygen, too much pressure. The movement came again. A figure, pale and slow, drifting across the far end of the corridor. My air felt suddenly insufficient. I checked my gauge. Plenty of air. But my breathing had accelerated, consuming it faster. Panic was the killer at depth. Panic made you stupid, made you forget your training, made you swim up too fast and die from the bends. I controlled my breathing. In, out, in, out. The figure had vanished. Narcosis, I told myself. Definitely narcosis. Time to leave. I turned to exit the wreck and came face to face with a sailor. He floated in the corridor behind me, uniform still crisp. Name tag readable CCNR. His eyes were open, pupils dilated to match the darkness. His mouth hung slightly open, and as I watched, frozen in terror, his jaw moved. Not decomposition, not current, movement. He was trying to speak. I don't remember swimming backward. Don't remember the beam I collided with, the way my tank clanged against metal, the silt cloud I created. I only remember those lips moving, forming silent words I couldn't hear, didn't want to hear. More figures appeared in the doorways along the corridor. Sailors, all of them, drifting from their rooms after 80 years. All those faces from the portholes emerging, surrounding me. They moved with purpose now, slow but deliberate, reaching out with pale hands. Not aggressive, exactly. More like beseeching. Their mouths all moved in the same pattern, the same silent words, over and over. My primary light died. The darkness was absolute. I activated my backup light with trembling fingers, the beam weaker, casting everything in sickly yellow. The sailors were closer now. A circle of them, Pale faces and dark uniforms, moving in. One reached out and touched my arm. The sensation went through my wetsuit, through my skin, straight to the bone, cold beyond cold, and with it came something else. A feeling. No, a memory, not mine, his. The night the ship went down. It crashed into my mind like a wave darkness. The engines dying. Not fire, something else. A call received, coordinates given. Orders to investigate. They'd found something. Something in the water at those coordinates. Something that sang. The song. That's what had killed them. Not fire, not torpedo, not accident. The song that came up from the deep, from the trench that yawned beneath the meridian. A song that didn't stop when you wanted it to. A song that pulled you down, kept you down, trapped you down. Still singing. I could hear it now, even through my panic, even through the pounding of my heart. That low vibration forming into something almost like words, almost like music, almost like, no, 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 no. I tore away from the sailor's grip and swam blind, bouncing off walls, my backup light swinging wildly. Behind me. The sailors followed, drifting in my wake like leaves caught in current. I found the gap in the stern, squeezed through, and emerged back into the open water. The anchor line. Where was the anchor line? I spun in circles, my light revealing only empty water and the vast wall of the wreck. The rope should be here, should be visible, but I'd gotten turned around, disoriented. Every direction looked the same. My air gauge, 15 minutes left. Not enough to search. Not enough for mistakes. The sailors began emerging from the wreck, drifting out of portholes, through gaps, from the holds. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. The entire crew, still here, still waiting, still listening to that song that never ended. One of them, Chen again, drifted close. His hand reached out, not threatening but offering, showing me something. His other hand pointed down toward the trench, down toward the source of the song. In his eyes, I saw the truth. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to warn me. They were trying to save me from their fate. Too late. Something whispered in my mind. Too late for them. Maybe too late for you. I felt it then, the pull. Not physical, but mental. But the song was in my head now, in my bones, resonating with something primal and terrified. It wanted me to understand, wanted me to hear the whole melody, wanted me to stay and listen and understand what they'd understood, that there were things in the deep places, things that sang, things that kept what they caught. My gauge, 12 minutes. I had to choose, try to find the anchor line, or make a free ascent, hoping I could see the surface light, hoping I could control my buoyancy, hoping I didn't get bent or lost or disoriented on the way up. The sailors watched me with those patient, dead eyes, waiting to see what I would choose. I chose up. I inflated my BCD, adding air to my buoyancy compensator, and began to rise. Slow, controlled, 1 foot per second. The standard ascent rate. But it felt like an eternity. Rising through that crushing darkness, with the wreck falling away beneath me, and the song still resonating in my chest. 300 feet. The sailors were still visible below, pale stars in the darkness. 280 feet. The pressure easing. My air consumption slowing. 260 feet. The darkness above looked the same as the darkness below. 240 feet. Something was wrong. The water felt different. Thicker. Like trying to swim through gelatin. 220 feet. Still no surface light. How deep were these waters? I knew these coordinates. The ocean floor was 340 feet. The surface should be visible by now. 200 feet. My computer was beeping. Decompression obligation. I'd been down too long, absorbed too much nitrogen. I needed to make stops on the way up. Let my body off gas slowly. But I had no line to hold, no way to maintain depth precisely while floating in empty water. 180 feet. The water was definitely thicker. And dark. So dark. Had there ever been light? Had there ever been a surface? 160 feet. I looked down and saw them still following. The entire crew of the Meridian, rising with me, like balloons released at a funeral. Their faces were clearer now, closer to the surface. I could see their expressions. Sorrow, warning, regret. 140 feet. My air gauge. 7 minutes. 120 feet. The song was louder now. How was that possible? Sound didn't work that way. The deeper the source, the harder to hear. Unless the source wasn't down there at all. Unless the source was everywhere. Unless I was already caught. 100 feet. I could see something above me now. Not sunlight. Not the surface. A darkness within the darkness. A vast shape, blocking what little light might have filtered down from above. 80 feet. The shape had texture. Scales, skin. Something organic and massive, suspended in the water column between me and salvation. 60 feet. It was moving. Slowly, ponderously, like a whale. But no whale was this big. No living thing should be this big. 40 feet. I could see details now. Protrusions that might have been limbs. Membranes that might have been fins. And all of it emanating that song. That terrible song that had kept the Meridian's crew trapped for 80 years. 20 feet. My air gauge 2 minutes. I should have been able to see the surface by now. Should have been able to see the sun, my boat, the normal world. But there was only darkness and that massive shape and the song end. I broke the surface, gasping, choking, spitting out my regulator and sucking in air that tasted like salvation. The sun was setting, painting the sky in reds and purples. My boat rocked on gentle swells 20 feet away. I swam to it, pulled myself aboard with shaking limbs, and lay on the deck, staring at the sky. Normal. Everything was normal. I'd been down for 72 minutes. My dive computer was screaming at me about decompression sickness, about mandatory stops I'd skipped, about nitrogen bubbles that might be forming in my blood right now. But I was alive. I looked back at the water. Just water. Normal. Dark, evening water. Nothing beneath it but a wreck in the deep and... A hand broke the surface. Then another. And another. The sailors of the Meridian rising. Not attacking. Not drowning. Just rising. Their faces broke the water, mouths open. Still forming those silent words. Don't go back. It still sings. It's still down there. And now it knows you're up here. They sank again, one by one, pulled back down by whatever force had kept them for 80 years. I started my boat's engine with numb fingers. Made for shore as fast as the boat would go. Behind me, the water where I dived looked no different than any other patch of ocean. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't gone back. I told the Maritime Authority I'd found nothing, just a false reading on the sonar. Closed the search. Marked the coordinates as clear. But I hear it sometimes late at night. That song, faint and far away. In my dreams, I'm back down there, suspended in the darkness, with patient, dead faces watching and warning and waiting. They're still there, all 278 of them, still listening, still trapped. And the thing is, I understand now why they couldn't leave. Why they stayed down there all these years, even as their bodies preserved in that impossible way, even as their ship rusted around them. It's not that they couldn't reach the surface. It's that they were afraid of what would follow them up. I think I brought something with me. Something small. Something patient. Something that sings very, very quietly. Sometimes I stand in the shower, and the water sounds like voices. Sometimes I look in the mirror, and my eyes are too dark, too wide, too deep. Sometimes I feel the pressure, even at sea level. The crushing weight of all that water, all that darkness, all that song. And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel like going back, just to check, just to see, just to listen. That's when I know I'm lost, too, not yet trapped, not yet drowned, but sinking slowly, inevitably, into the depth below. Story 5. I wake to the sound of rain against a window I don't recognize. The bed is unfamiliar, soft, with white sheets that smell of lavender. The room around me is dim, lit by a lamp on a nightstand that casts warm yellow light across wallpaper patterned with tiny roses. An old-fashioned room, comfortable like something from a countryside inn. I sit up, head aching, and try to remember how I got here. Nothing comes. I remember my name. That's something. I'm David Mitchell, age 34. I live in... Where do I live? The information is there, just out of reach, like trying to recall a dream that's already fading. I check my pockets. Empty. No phone. No wallet, no keys. I'm wearing pajamas I don't remember owning. Soft flannel, blue plaid. My clothes from before, wherever before was, are nowhere to be seen. The door to the room is unlocked. It opens onto a hallway, narrow and wallpapered like the room, with several other doors along its length. At the end, stairs lead downward. I can smell coffee brewing, bacon frying. Normal breakfast sounds. I descend carefully, one hand on the railing. My legs feel weak, uncertain, like I've been in bed for a long time. The stairs open into a small lobby. Front desk, guest book. A seating area with overstuffed chairs. Everything neat and clean, and slightly old-fashioned. Like the entire building exists in an earlier decade. A woman stands behind the desk. Middle-aged, pleasant face, wearing a cardigan. She smiles when she sees me. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell." "Sleep well?" "Oh." I approach the desk, trying to organize my thoughts. I'm not sure. I don't remember getting here. I don't remember checking in. Her smile doesn't waver. That's normal. Don't worry. Would you like some breakfast? The dining room is just through there. She gestures to a doorway behind her. Normal. What's normal about not remembering? All in good time. She interrupts gently. You must be hungry. And there are others already eating. They can explain better than I can. I want to demand answers, but my stomach growls, and I realize I'm starving. How long has it been since I ate? I can't remember. The dining room holds 4 tables, 3 of them occupied. A young woman sits alone by the window, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. An elderly couple shares a table near the fireplace, talking in low voices. And at the 3rd table sits a man about my age, eating methodically, his eyes distant. I take the empty 4th table. Almost immediately, the woman from the desk appears with a plate. Bacon, eggs, toast, orange juice. All of it perfectly prepared. I start eating before I can think about it, hunger overwhelming caution. You're new. I look up. The young woman has moved to my table, coffee cup in hand. She's maybe 25, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a sweater that look as confused as I feel about being here. Yes, I think so. I just woke up and you don't remember getting here. Don't remember yesterday or the day before. Maybe not even last week. She sips her coffee. Welcome to the Forgetting Inn. The what? That's what I call it. The sign outside says Rosewood Inn, but that's not what it really is. She glances around, lowering her voice. How much do you remember? Before waking up, I mean. I try to focus. My name. Some fragments. But it's like looking through fog. I remember a car, maybe, driving. But where, or when, or why? The details slip away even as I reach for them. She nods. Same for all of us. I'm Maya, by the way. I've been here 3 days, I think. But time works strangely here. Sometimes a day feels like a week. Sometimes an hour vanishes. What is this place? That's what we're all trying to figure out. She gestures to the others. Eleanor and Frank over there, they've been here longest. A week, maybe more. Hard to say. And James. She nods toward the solitary man. He arrived yesterday, or thinks he did. Memory is unreliable here, but someone must know. The woman at the desk. Her Mrs. Holloway. She's pleasant enough, but she never really answers questions. Just smiles and tells us to rest, to eat, to relax. Everything we need is provided. Meals appear like clockwork. Our rooms are always clean, but we can't leave. What do you mean, can't leave? Maya stands. Come on, I'll show you. We walk through the lobby, past Mrs. Holloway, who smiles beatifically, and out the front door. The world ends 10 feet from the building, not dramatically. There's no cliff, no wall, no barrier. Just nothing. Where there should be a driveway, a road, a landscape, there's only gray fog. Thick, impenetrable, silent. It doesn't move or swirl. It simply exists, a curtain of nothingness surrounding the inn. I step toward it, and Maya grabs my arm. Don't. Frank tried to walk into it on the second day. He was gone for what felt like hours. When he came back, he'd aged 20 years. I stopped staring at the elderly man through the window. His young underneath.
Of us?
Not anymore. The fog takes things. Memory. Maybe more. None of us are willing to test it again. We return inside, and I feel the weight of it settling over me. The understanding that I'm trapped in a place that shouldn't exist, with no memory of how I arrived and no way to leave. What do we do? I ask. We try to remember, Maya says. We piece together what we can, share our fragments, hope that somehow we find a pattern. A way out. Over the next hours, days, I fall into the routine of the inn. Breakfast appears, lunch appears, dinner appears. The meals are always perfect, always satisfying, but I can never quite remember eating them afterward. Time slips through my fingers like water. I talk with the others, sharing what little I can remember. Maya was a teacher, she thinks. Elementary school. She remembers children's faces, but not their names. Frank and Eleanor were married, traveling somewhere. An anniversary trip, but where? The destination is gone, erased. James barely speaks. He sits by windows, staring at the fog, whispering numbers under his breath. When I ask what he's counting, he just looks at me with hollow eyes. Days, he says, or hours, or minutes. Whatever's left. We try everything to trigger memories. Conversations about cities, hoping something clicks. Songs. Maya has a good voice and sings half remembered melodies. Frank tries to draw maps of places he thinks he's been, but the lines never quite connect. And every morning, I wake up remembering less. It's subtle at first. Small things. I forget what I had for dinner. Then I forget entire conversations. Then I wake up one morning unable to remember Maya's name, even though she's sitting across from me at breakfast. It's happening to all of us, she says. Maya. That's right, Maya. How could I forget? We're not just trapped here. We're dissolving, bit by bit. How long until we forget everything? I ask. She doesn't answer. Doesn't need to. I can see it in Frank's eyes, the way they barely focus anymore. In Eleanor, who sometimes doesn't seem to recognize her own husband. In James, who stopped speaking entirely, just sits and stares. I try to fight it. I write things down. My name, facts about myself, lists of what I remember. But when I look at the paper later, my handwriting has changed, become stranger, and some of the facts contradict each other. Was I a teacher, an accountant, a writer? All three. None. Mrs. Holloway continues her cheerful routine, serving meals, tidying rooms, always smiling that unchanging smile. I confront her one evening, desperate. Why are we here? What does this place want? You're here to rest, she says, as always. To forget your troubles. Isn't that nice? I don't want to forget. I want to remember. I want to leave. But why would you want to leave? She seems genuinely puzzled. You have everything you need here. Food, shelter, companionship. No stress, no pain, no worries. Just peace. It's not peace. It's erasure. She pats my hand gently. Time makes everything better, Mr. Mitchell. You'll see. Eventually, You'll understand. That night. Is it night? The windows are dark, but they're always dark. I gather the others in my room. Even James comes, though he seems barely present. We need to remember something, I say. Anything real. Something from before. If we can hold on to one true memory, maybe that's an anchor. Maybe that's a way out. I remember my daughter, Eleanor says suddenly. Her voice is clear for the first time in days. Her name was Jennifer. Jenny. She had my eyes. We were going to visit her. That's why we were traveling.
Yes?
Frank grasps her hand. Jenny. We were going to see Jenny. She lives in, but the name of the place is gone. Maya closes her eyes. I remember a classroom. Room 7, 3rd grade. There was a boy who always brought me apples. Real apples from his grandmother's tree. His name was Martin Mazin, she says suddenly, eyes opening. Mason Crawford. He was shy but sweet. He drew me a picture once of but the memory fades before she can finish. I dig deep, trying to find something solid. I remember driving. I say slowly. Late at night. I was tired, so tired. And there was rain, and the road was dark, and the memory hits like a physical blow, headlights swerving, the sickening crunch of metal paint. Darkness. Oh God, I whisper. I was in an accident. The others stare at me, and I see recognition dawning in their faces. Maya's hand goes to her head, touching a spot where I suddenly realize there's a faint scar. Frank looks at Eleanor, and they both understand something unspoken. We're dead, James says, his first words in days, and they're the truth we've all been avoiding. This isn't an inn. It's what comes after. The place you go when you're not ready to let go. Mrs. Holloway appears in the doorway. Her smile is different now, sadder, more knowing. You're not dead, she corrects gently.
Not yet.
You're between. Some of you might still wake up. Some might not. But here, in this place, you don't have to decide. You can rest. Forget. Let go of everything that hurts. But we forget everything, Maya says. Not just pain. Everything that made us.
Us. Yes.
Mrs. Holloway agrees. And isn't that peaceful? No more struggling. No more questions. Just rest. What happens when we forget it all? I ask. When there's nothing left of who we were. She gestures to the window. Then you go into the fog, and you become part of something else. Something without pain or memory or fear. Something quiet. That's death, Frank says. Perhaps, or perhaps it's just the next thing. Holloway's smile is infinitely patient. The choice is yours, of course. Fight to remember. And maybe you'll wake up in your old lives, or let go and find peace here. Either way, the inn will care for you until you're ready. We don't sleep that night. We sit together in the dining room, sharing what we can remember, clinging to the fragments. I remember my accident now, the terror of it. But I also remember something before. A life. People who loved me. Details are hazy, but the feeling is real. Do I want to go back to that? To the pain and uncertainty and struggle? Or do I want to stay here, in this quiet place, and let myself fade into nothing? Days pass. Or maybe hours. Frank and Eleanor forget our conversation. Forget their daughter's name again. They hold hands and smile at each other, content in their forgetting. James has stopped moving entirely. He sits in a chair by the window, staring at nothing, breathing so slowly, I sometimes think he's already gone. Maya still fights. She writes her students' names on napkins, scraps of paper, anything she can find. The names change slightly each time. Mason becomes Martin becomes Malcolm, but she keeps trying. And I remember the accident, remember the pain. I'm slowly underneath it. I'm starting to remember what came after. Ambulance, hospital, beeping machines. Voices telling me to hold on, to stay, to fight. I'm in a coma. I tell Maya one morning, that's what this is. My brain trying to process, to decide. Maybe we all are, she says. Or maybe some of us are just gone. And this is where we ghost ourselves before we accept it. What are you going to do? She looks at her lists of names, her desperate attempt to hold on to who she was. I don't know, she admits. The fog is starting to look not frightening, almost welcoming, and I'm so tired of fighting. But if you let go, I know I'll cease to exist, or I'll become something else. But David, she uses my name, and I'm grateful she still remembers it. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what's supposed to happen. I can't argue, because I feel it too. The pull toward forgetting, the tempting peace of letting everything go. That afternoon, Eleanor walks into the fog. We don't see her go, don't hear anything. Just look up from our meal and realize she's gone. Frank sits alone at their table, staring at the empty chair across from him. I had a wife, he says. Didn't I? Yes, Maya tells him gently. Eleanor. She loved you very much. Eleanor, he repeats. But there's no recognition in his eyes. He's forgotten already, the memory taken by the same fog that took her. James goes next, simply stops breathing. Mrs. Holloway comes and removes him gently, and when I ask where, she just smiles. He's at peace now, she says, finally. It's just Maya and me, and Frank. But Frank barely counts anymore. He's more ghost than person, going through the motions of eating and sleeping, but with no one home behind his eyes. I don't want to go. Maya says one night, we're sitting in the lobby, the rain endless outside. But I also don't want to stay, and I'm so tired of being in between. Wake up, I tell her, in your real body, in the hospital. Just wake up. What if I can't? What if this is all there is left? We sit in silence, and I realize I don't have an answer. Maybe there is no answer. Maybe the inn is exactly what Mrs. Holloway says. A place to rest until we're ready for whatever comes next. Death or life or something else entirely. I wake up in the inn, not in any hospital, and Maya's gone. Her room is empty. The dining room serves breakfast for two, me and Frank. I'm alone now, the last one fighting. Mrs. Holloway pours me coffee. You've stayed longer than most, she observes. Still searching for something. A way out. The only way out is through the fog, dear. You know that. But where does it lead? Depends, she says, on what you're ready for. I finish my coffee and stand. Walk to the front door. The fog waits, gray and patient. I think about my life before. The fragments I can still touch. I think about the accident, the pain. I think about the choice of fight to wake up or surrender to sleep. And I think about how tired I am, how peaceful the fog looks, how easy it would be to just step forward, let go, forget. My hand is on the doorknob. Behind me, Mrs. Holloway hums a gentle tune. The fog swirls, almost inviting. I open the door, and I beep, 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 machines, voices. Pain flooding back, sharp and real and terrible. He's waking up! David, can you hear me?
Davy Light.
Too bright. Shapes moving. Someone holding my hand. David, squeeze if you can hear me. I squeeze. Barely. Everything hurts. Thank God. You've been under for 2 weeks. The accident was bad, but you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I'm in a hospital bed. The real world. I made it back. But as I drift in and out of consciousness, fighting the pain, I remember the inn, the fog, the peace, and part of me, a small, tired part, wonders if I made the right choice, or if I should have stayed. In the quiet, where nothing hurts, where everything, eventually, is forgotten. Beep, beep, beep. The machines keep rhythm with my heart. And somewhere, in a place between sleeping and waking, I swear I can still smell lavender and hear rain against a window I don't quite recognize. The forgetting in is waiting. It's always waiting. For the next time I'm too tired to fight. For the next time I need to rest. For the moment when I finally choose the fog over the pain. But not today. Today I wake up. Today I remember. Today I live. Tomorrow we'll see. Story 6. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper, delivered by hand to my apartment door. I found it there one morning, propped against the doorframe with no envelope, no return address. Just my name written in elegant calligraphy across the front, for Miss Sarah Chen, art historian. Inside, the message was brief. You are cordially invited to a private viewing at the Blackwood Gallery. Tonight, midnight. Come alone. The art has been waiting. I should have thrown it away. Should have recognized it for what it was. Some elaborate prank, or worse, something dangerous. But I was writing my dissertation on forgotten Victorian painters, and the Blackwood Gallery had been closed for 40 years. Its collection was legendary, rumored to contain pieces that had vanished from public record, artists whose names had been deliberately erased from history. My curiosity won. The building stood on a narrow street I'd never noticed before, though I'd walked this neighborhood 100 times. Victorian architecture, all Gothic arches and gargoyle waterspouts, squeezed between 2 modern offices like an architectural fossil. The windows were dark, except for one on the 3rd floor, where a warm light beckoned. The front door was unlocked. It swung open at my touch, revealing a marble foyer thick with dust. My footsteps echoed as I crossed to the staircase, following a trail of roses, real roses, fresh and red, that led upward into the darkness. Each step creaked. The walls were lined with empty frames, their paintings removed or stolen long ago. But in the darkness, I could almost see them. Shadows where art had been, ghosts of color and composition, burned into the walls by decades of hanging. The third floor opened into a grand gallery, and my breath caught. The room was magnificent. Vaulted ceilings painted with celestial scenes. Polished wood floors reflecting the light of 100 candles. And the walls, oh, the walls were covered in paintings. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, in frames of gold and silver and blackened wood. I'd found it. The lost collection of the Blackwood Gallery. I moved closer to the nearest painting. A portrait of a young woman in a blue dress. The style was exquisite, somewhere between Pre-Raphaelite and something more modern, more alive. The woman's eyes seemed to follow me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Beautiful, isn't she? I spun around. A man stood in the doorway, elderly, dressed in a curator's blazer that had gone out of style decades ago. His smile was warm, but his eyes were strange, too bright, too aware. "I'm sorry," I said, heart racing. The invitation said, Yes, the invitation. We've been expecting you." He gestured around the gallery. "Welcome to the Blackwood. I am Mr. Hesper, the curator. Well, the last curator. The only curator now, I suppose." His laugh was dry as paper. "Please, look around. That's what you came for, isn't it? To see the art." He vanished back through the doorway before I could respond. I should have left then. But the paintings, they were extraordinary. I recognized styles I'd studied for years, techniques I'd only seen in photographs. Here was a Bellamy that had been reported destroyed in a fire. There, a Morrison that had simply vanished from auction records in 1924. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but the battery was dead. Impossible. I'd charged it before leaving. I tried the camera anyway. Nothing. As if the gallery existed in some pocket where technology couldn't reach. I moved to the next painting. A pastoral scene. A family having a picnic by a lake. The detail was incredible. I could see individual blades of grass, the pattern on the picnic blanket, the expressions on their faces. They looked so real, so alive, too alive. As I watched, one of the figures moved, just slightly. The father turned his head, following my gaze. I stepped back, nearly tripping over my own feet. Trick of the light, I told myself. Candle flicker creating illusion of movement. I'd seen it before in old paintings, the way shadows could seem animate. But then the mother in the painting smiled, directly at me. Remarkable, aren't they? Mr. Hesper had returned, carrying a silver tray with tea. The Blackwood specialized in a particular type of art. Paintings that capture their subjects. Thoroughly, I don't understand. He set down the tray and picked up a cup, sipping thoughtfully. Of course you don't. Not yet. But you will. He gestured to the walls. Every painting here is a prison, Miss Chen. And every figure you see was once as real as you or I. I laughed nervously. That's a creative interpretation. Not an interpretation. A fact. He pointed to a nearby portrait of a stern Victorian gentleman. That's Lord Westbrook, who commissioned his portrait in 1887. He wanted to live forever, preserved in his prime. The artist, a woman named Mariana Blackwood, promised him exactly that. And she delivered. He's been 40, 2 years old for 130, 8 years now. The figure in the painting was definitely moving now. Lips forming words I couldn't hear, hand pressed against the inside of the canvas, as if pushing against a membrane. "This is insane," I whispered. "Is it?" Mr. Hesper moved to another painting, the young woman in blue I'd first noticed. "This is Catherine. She came for a viewing, just like you, in 1968. She was writing a book about lost art. She stayed." He smiled sadly. "They all stay, eventually. The gallery requires fresh perspectives, new subjects." I backed toward the door. "I'm leaving." "Are you?" He didn't move to stop me, just watched with those 2 bright eyes. "Look around, Miss Chen." Really look. Against my will, I did. And I saw what I'd missed before. In the paintings, among the Victorian ladies and stern gentlemen and pastoral scenes, there were modern figures too. A woman in 1960s clothing, trapped in a garden scene. A man in 1980s business attire, standing frozen in a street painting. A young person in contemporary clothes, barely visible in the background of a crowd scene. "You're lying," I said, but my voice shook. "Am I? Then why are you still seeing them move?" He gestured grandly. "The Blackwood family discovered something, Miss Chen. A technique, a ritual, a method. Call it what you will. They learned how to transfer life from flesh to canvas, to trap consciousness inside paint and frame. And they built this gallery to house their work." I ran. Down the stairs, roses crushing under my feet, through the dusty foyer. But the front door wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door itself remained sealed, as if it had become part of the wall. I tried the windows. They wouldn't budge either, glass thick as stone. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not just Mr. Hesper. Multiple footsteps. I turned and saw them descending. Figures in period clothing. Faces I recognized from the paintings. The Victorian gentleman. The woman in blue. Others, dozens of others, all moving with the strange, fluid grace of painted things come to life. "You can't leave," Mr. Hesper called down. "Not until the gallery has made its choice. Some visitors are allowed to go. Most aren't. The art decides." I fled deeper into the building, through corridors lined with more paintings, all of them watching, all of them moving now. Hands pressed against canvas, mouths opening in silent screams or warnings or invitations. I found myself in a room full of empty frames, dozens of them, mounted on the walls, waiting. In the center stood an easel with a fresh canvas, and beside it, a palette of paints that glistened wetly despite the dust on everything else. The painted people filed into the room behind me, forming a circle. They didn't speak, but I could feel their attention, their hunger. How long had they been trapped? How desperately did they want company? New faces, fresh consciousness to share their eternal prison. Mr. Hesper entered last, carrying something, a sketch pad and charcoal. The gallery must choose, he repeated. It will paint you now, Miss Chen. Capture your essence, your life, your soul if you believe in such things. And you will join the collection, unless... He paused, studying me. Unless you can prove yourself worthy of freedom. How? My voice was barely a whisper. He smiled. Be painting someone else. By becoming the artist instead of the subject. That was always Mariana Blackwood's rule. Create, and you may leave. Be created, and you stay forever. He held out the sketch pad. Choose someone. Anyone. Capture them truthfully, completely, and the gallery will accept them in your place. Fail or refuse, and you join the walls. I took the sketch pad with shaking hands. The charcoal felt warm, almost alive, around me. The painted figures watched with expressions that mixed hope and despair. Had they all been offered this same choice? Had they all refused? I can't do this, I said. I'm an art historian, not an artist. I can't paint well enough. The gallery will guide your hand. Mr. Hesper interrupted. It only requires your intent. Your willingness to sacrifice another for yourself. He gestured to the watching figures. That's what they couldn't do. Their morality trapped them. But you, Miss Chen, are you strong enough to save yourself? I looked at the empty canvas on the easel, then at the faces surrounding me. In their eyes, I saw myself reflected, terrified, desperate, human. They had all been human once. All been visitors who'd come looking for lost art and found something else entirely. My hands moved without conscious thought, charcoal scratching across paper. But who was I drawing? I hadn't decided, hadn't chosen a victim. Yet the lines flowed anyway, guided by something other than my will. A face emerged on the page. My face. No, I whispered, but I couldn't stop. The gallery had made its choice. I was creating my own prison, capturing myself, becoming both artist and subject. The charcoal moved faster. Details emerged. The curve of my jaw, the fear in my eyes, the way my hair fell across my shoulders. It was better than anything I'd ever drawn, more alive than I'd thought possible. And with each stroke, I felt something leaving me, being transferred to the page. The painted figures began to smile. When the drawing was complete, Mr. Hesper took it gently from my hands. My fingers were numb, my body feeling distant, dreamlike. He carried the sketch to the easel, pinned it there, and began to mix paints. Wet, I managed to say. I didn't choose someone else. I drew myself. Doesn't that mean? It means you made the only moral choice, he said softly, brush touching canvas. You refused to sacrifice another. Just like all of them, he gestured to the watching figures. The gallery respects that, rewards it even. Rewards. The room was growing dimmer, or maybe my vision was fading. You won't be alone, he said, painting now with quick, expert strokes. You'll have all of them. An eternity of company. And someday, when the next visitor arrives, you'll stand with the others, watching, hoping, warning them away, even as the gallery pulls them in. I felt myself flattening, my three-dimensional body compressing into 2 dimensions. The room tilted, or I tilted, reality bending around me like a picture frame. The painted figures reached out, their hands passing through me, welcoming me. "I'm sorry," one of them said. "The woman in blue, Catherine. I tried to warn you with my eyes. We all tried. But the gallery is stronger than our warnings." My body was on the canvas now, trapped in paint and light. I could see the room from a new angle, flattened and fixed. I could see Mr. Hesper stepping back to admire his work. I could see my own body, empty and hollow, collapsing to the floor like a discarded dress. "Excellent," Mr. Hesper said. "Welcome to the collection, Miss Chen. You'll hang in the main gallery, I think. Next to Catherine, you two will have much to discuss." He carried my painting, me. I was the painting now. Out of the room and back to the main gallery. I felt every step like a heartbeat. I felt the brush of air as we moved through corridors, felt the weight of my new frame as he hung me on the wall. From inside my canvas prison, I could see the entire gallery now. All the other paintings, all the other trapped souls, all of us watching and waiting and warning no one, because no one could hear us. Time moved strangely here, sometimes fast, days flickering past like pages in a book, sometimes slow, hours stretching into eternities, but always the same, always trapped, always aware. I learned their stories, the others. Lord Westbrook, who'd wanted immortality and gotten it. Catherine, the art historian like me, who'd come seeking knowledge. A jazz musician from the 1940s. A flapper from the 1920s. A scientist from the turn of the century. All of us curious, all of us lured by the promise of seeing the unseen. And we waited for the next visitor, the next invitation to be delivered, the next curious soul who would ignore the warnings and come seeking art. Would they be strong enough to sacrifice another? Or would they join us, adding one more face to the ever-growing collection? I hoped they'd stay away. Hoped the gallery would be forgotten, abandoned, demolished even. Better to be destroyed than to keep collecting forever. But I knew better. The gallery had been here for over a century. It would be here for centuries more. And the invitations would keep going out, written in elegant calligraphy, delivered to doors by invisible hands. Come alone. The art has been waiting. Days pass. Weeks, months. I've lost count. From my frame, I watch Mr. Hesper dust the other paintings, adjust our positions, sometimes talk to us about the art world beyond these walls. Gallery shows we'll never see. Artists we'll never meet. A life that continues without us. Sometimes I see movement at the edges of my vision. Other paintings shifting. Other trapped souls trying to reach out across the space between frames. We've learned to communicate in a way. Not words, but feelings, impressions. We share our despair, our memories, our fading hopes. Catherine hangs beside me, as Mr. Hesper promised. Sometimes I feel her attention turning toward me, a silent solidarity. We were both here seeking knowledge. We both found something else instead. Last night. Was it night? Hard to tell. I felt something change. A vibration in the canvas. A stirring in the gallery's ancient magic. Another invitation had gone out. Someone new was coming. I press myself against the inside of my frame, trying to make my warning visible. Trying to show the fear in my painted eyes, the desperate urgency in my frozen expression. Maybe this time someone will see. Maybe this time someone will turn away before it's too late. But I know they won't. Curiosity is too strong. The promise of lost art too tempting. And the gallery is very, very patient. I hear footsteps on the stairs. Fresh, real, alive. They're crushing the roses as they climb. The candles flicker as the door opens. A young man enters the gallery. Eyes wide with wonder, smartphone already raised to take pictures. The phone won't work, but he doesn't know that yet. He moves toward the paintings, toward us, and I see the exact moment he notices something wrong. The moment he sees us moving. The moment he realizes the art is alive. Mr. Hesper emerges from the shadows, that same warm smile, those same bright eyes. "Welcome to the Blackwood Gallery," he says, voice cultured and kind and absolutely inhuman. "I am Mr. Hesper, the curator. Please, look around. The art has been waiting." The young man backs away, but I can see in his eyes that it's already too late. The gallery has him. We'll test him. We'll offer him the terrible choice. And I know, we all know, that he'll make the moral decision. He'll refuse to sacrifice another. He'll join us here, in our golden frames, in our eternal prison. And the collection will grow by one more face, one more story, one more soul trapped in paint and canvas, and the terrible immortality of art. I try to warn him with my eyes, but I know he can't hear me. No one ever can. That's the cruelest part of the Blackwood Gallery. We're surrounded by visitors, by living people, by consciousness and breath and warmth. But we're completely, utterly, eternally alone. Alone together, forever. Welcome to the collection. Story 7. The overhead lights, dimmed as Flight 447, settled into its overnight crossing. I adjusted my badge beneath my shirt, feeling the familiar weight of the metal against my chest. Federal Air Marshal. 6 years on the job. And I'd learned to read passengers like a book within minutes of boarding. The nervous fidgeter in Twice. The businessman already snoring in 8A. The young mother soothing her infant in the bulkhead seat, but the man in 14B, the seat directly beside mine, he was different. He'd boarded last, moving through the aisle with an unusual grace that seemed almost liquid. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His skin was pale, but not sickly. Luminous, almost. When he settled into his seat, he moved with such precision that he didn't disturb the air around him. "Evening," I said, offering the customary greeting. He turned to me, and I found myself looking into eyes that seemed darker than they should be. Not brown, not black, something deeper, like looking into a well at midnight. "Good evening," he replied. His voice was smooth, cultured, with an accent I couldn't quite place. European, certainly, but which country? The vowels seemed to shift between syllables, never quite settling. The flight attendants made their rounds. He declined the offered beverage with a polite gesture. declined the snack. Declined everything, actually. Just sat there, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap. In 6 years of flying, I'd never seen someone sit so motionless for so long. I tried to read, but my training kept drawing my attention back to him. His chest. Did it rise and fall? I couldn't tell. The cabin was dark now. Only the scattered reading lights, creating small pools of illumination. Most passengers had settled into sleep, or the glazed half, consciousness of long flights. Around hour 2, I decided to stretch my legs. Standard procedure: walk the aisles, check the lavatories, observe. When I returned, I caught him staring at the sleeping woman across the aisle. Not a casual glance, a focused, intense study of her exposed neck where her travel pillow had slipped aside. Long flight, I said, settling back into my seat. He didn't respond immediately. Then, slowly, he turned that unsettling gaze toward me. Very long, he agreed. Though dawn always comes eventually. Something in the way he said, dawn, made my skin prickle. Business or pleasure? I asked, falling into the standard small talk that often revealed more than people intended. Necessity, he replied. Then, after a pause, I travel at night when I can. I find daylight disagreeable. I'd encountered many odd passengers, eccentric billionaires, paranoid conspiracy theorists, people with unusual phobias, but this felt different. There was a quality to his stillness that reminded me of predators I'd seen in documentaries. The absolute focus before the strike, photosensitivity. I asked, trying to sound casual. A smile flickered across his lips. Thin lips. Had they been that pale earlier? Something like that. The flight attendant came by with her cart, preparing the mid-flight service. Sir, can I get you anything? Water, juice. No, thank you, he said, that same polite gesture. I don't drink. Those things. The way he paused before. Those things sent another chill down my spine. I excused myself again, this time making my way to the forward galley, where Sarah, the lead flight attendant, was preparing coffee. Sarah! I kept my voice low, the passenger in 420B. Did you notice anything unusual during boarding? She glanced up, thinking. The tall one. Very polite. Didn't check any bags, just a small leather case. Premium ticket, booked last minute. Why? Probably nothing, I said, though my instincts were screaming otherwise. Has he been to the restroom at all? She shook her head. Not once. Some people hate airplane bathrooms. I returned to my seat. A 413B was reading now, a very old book with a leather cover and pages that looked hand-cut. The text wasn't in English, maybe Latin. He turned the pages with those long, pale fingers, and I noticed something else. No rings, no watch, no phone. In an age where everyone was tethered to technology, he carried nothing electronic. Interesting book. I ventured. Medieval medicine, he said, not looking up. Fascinating how they understood certain conditions. The requirements of blood, the humors, what they called diseases of darkness. He turned a page. Of course, they were wrong about many things, but not everything. My hand instinctively moved toward my waist, where my weapon rested. Not that I thought I'd need it. This wasn't a terrorist. This was... what? My rational mind supplied answers. Eccentric millionaire, odd personality, nothing more. But my instincts, honed by years of reading threats, suggested something else entirely. Around hour 4, the cabin reached that dead zone of night flying. The temperature had dropped. The crew always kept red, eyes cool, to discourage bacterial growth. Most passengers were asleep now, wrapped in thin airline blankets. The only sounds were the constant thrum of engines and the occasional cry of a dreaming child. I must have dozed. I jerked awake to find Hortwin B standing in the aisle, leaning over the sleeping woman across from us. His face was inches from her neck. Her head had tilted back, exposing the vulnerable curve of her throat. Hey, I started to rise. He straightened immediately, turning to face me. In the dim light, his eyes caught a reflection that shouldn't have been there. A red gleam, like a cat's eyes in headlights. She was having a nightmare, he said quietly. Her pulse was racing. I could hear it. I was simply concerned. How could he hear her pulse over the engine noise? Please sit down, sir, I said, my voice carrying the authority of my position without quite revealing it. He complied, settling back into his seat with that disturbing grace. You're wondering about me, he said. It wasn't a question, trying to categorize me. Decide if I'm a threat. He smiled, and in the darkness, his teeth seemed very white. You're quite perceptive. More than most. I don't know what you mean, I said, hand now resting on the armrest, closer to my weapon. Of course you do, he continued, voice barely above a whisper. You're a guardian, a protector. I can sense it, just as you sense what I am. He leaned slightly closer. The question is, what will you do about it? My mouth had gone draughty. This had to be some kind of game, or mental illness, or elaborate prank. But his eyes, those impossible eyes, held no humor. The sun rises in approximately 3 hours, he said, settling back. Until then, we're all trapped together in this metal tube, hurtling through the darkness. Rather like a coffin when you think about it. But cozier. I should have called the flight deck, should have alerted the crew. But what would I say? That I suspected a passenger was a vampire. They'd think I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. Sleep deprivation, stress, too many flights, all rational explanations. You're not going to act, he observed, because you're not certain. And uncertainty is paralyzing, isn't it? You need evidence, proof. He gestured around the darkened cabin. But what proof can exist for something that shouldn't exist at all? The flight attendant call button dinged. Sarah moved down the aisle to respond. As she passed, 14B inhaled deeply, his eyes briefly closing. When they opened again, that red gleam was more pronounced. The scent, he murmured. It's always strongest when they're stressed. Fear adds something. A spice, if you will. Stop, I said quietly, firmly. Stop what? Talking, breathing, existing. His smile widened. I'm simply being honest. You want honesty, don't you? In your profession, lies are the real danger. He had a point, and that made everything worse. The next 2 hours passed in excruciating slowness. I didn't dare sleep. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there with that preternatural stillness. But I felt his awareness of every passenger, especially those whose necks were exposed, whose pulses were visible beneath pale skin. Around hour 6, the cabin began to lighten. Not from any internal lights, but from the approaching dawn. The sky outside the windows shifted from black to deep blue to violet. And I noticed something remarkable. As the light increased, my seatmate seemed to diminish. Not physically, exactly, but his presence, that overwhelming sense of otherness, began to fade. His skin lost some of its luminous quality. His eyes, when he glanced at the windows, looked more normal. Just dark brown, nothing supernatural. "Dawn," he said softly. A's promised. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, raising window shades, preparing for landing. Morning light flooded the space. The woman across the aisle stretched and yawned, completely unaware of how close she'd come to. I still didn't know. As we began our descent, 14B finally spoke again. "You did your job well," he said. "Stayed awake, stayed vigilant, protected them all." He gestured subtly at the cabin. "From me, or from your own fears. Does it matter?" The wheels touched down. The cabin erupted in the usual sounds of a landing. Phones turning on, bags being retrieved, the collective anticipation of arrival. He stood, retrieving his leather case from the overhead bin. As passengers began to file out, he paused beside my seat. "I do appreciate the company," he said. "Night flights can be so lonely, and hunger becomes difficult when surrounded by high." He didn't finish the sentence. "Who are you?" I finally asked. He smiled, genuinely this time. "Does it matter? We're landing now. Dawn has broken. And I'm about to disappear into the morning crowds of a city where no one will notice one more pale stranger." He leaned down, voice dropping. "But I'll tell you a secret, Marshal. The night is very, very long, and there are so many flights." Then he was gone, moving up the aisle and out the door. I sat there long after the other passengers had deplaned, staring at the empty seat beside me. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows, turning everything ordinary and explicable. Sarah stopped by. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I muttered. She handed me something. "Your seatmate left this, said to give it to you." It was a business card. Heavy stock, expensive, embossed lettering that read simply, V. Dragomir, Night Services. Below that, a phone number. I turned it over. On the back, written in an elegant hand, "For when you're ready to believe, or when you need someone who understands the darkness. Either way, I'll be on the next red eye." I never did call that number. Filed my standard post flight report. Mentioned nothing unusual. Who would believe it? But sometimes, on night flights, I find myself studying the passengers more carefully, looking for that telltale stillness, that luminous quality of skin, those eyes that seem to hold too much darkness. And I always always book an aisle seat now, just in case. Because the thing about flying at night is this. We're all suspended between one world and another, trapped in a metal tube where normal rules seem to bend, where anything might be sitting in the seat beside you. Where dawn, no matter how inevitable, always feels impossibly far away. I still have that card tucked into my badge holder. I've never thrown it away. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the longest flights, I take it out and stare at that phone number, wondering, always wondering, what if? Story 8. I never wanted a party. That's what I keep telling myself now, though I know it's not entirely true. When my friends first suggested throwing a celebration for my 30th birthday, I demurred in that practiced way people do when they want to be convinced. And they'd convinced me, worn down my resistance with promises of nothing elaborate, just close friends, good food, maybe some wine, something intimate and warm to mark the transition into a new decade. We settled on my apartment. It wasn't large, but it had a certain charm: high ceilings, large windows that caught the afternoon light, and a living room that opened onto a small balcony overlooking the city. Sarah volunteered to handle decorations. Marcus promised to bring his famous pala. And Elena said she'd make her grandmother's tres leches cake because she knew it was my favorite. The date was set for Saturday, March 15th, 7 o'clock. 12 guests total, all people I'd known for years. People whose presence in my life felt as natural and necessary as breathing. The day arrived with unseasonable warmth. Spring had come early, and the air smelled of thawed earth and possibility. I spent the morning cleaning, arranging furniture to create more space, setting out plates and glasses. Sarah arrived first, her arms full of balloons and streamers in shades of silver and blue. She kissed my cheek and immediately began transforming my practical living space into something festive. You only turn 30 once, she said, standing on a chair to hang decorations from the ceiling. Might as well make it memorable. If I'd known how right she was, I might have cancelled everything then. Sent everyone home. Locked the door and spent the evening alone with a book and a glass of wine. But I didn't know, couldn't know. That memorable was the last thing I wanted this night to be. Marcus arrived at 6:30, balancing an enormous pan of pala. The aroma filled the apartment: saffron and seafood, garlic and paprika. Elena came shortly after with the cake. 3 perfect layers of tender sponge soaked in milk and topped with clouds of whipped cream. Others arrived in pairs and clusters. James and his partner David, my college friend Priya, my coworker Tom, who always brought excellent wine, Sarah's boyfriend Daniel, and 3 others whose presence I'd been counting on to make the evening complete. By 7:15, everyone was there. 12 people filling my living room with laughter and conversation, the sound of ice clinking in glasses, the warm buzz of voices overlapping in that particular music that good gatherings create. I moved among them, accepting hugs and birthday wishes, feeling something loosen in my chest, that I hadn't realized was tight. This was good. This was exactly what I'd needed without knowing I'd needed it. We ate around 8, crowding around my dining table and the coffee table, balancing plates on laps, passing serving spoons and bottles of wine. Marcus's palo was perfect, as always. The conversation flowed easily, moving from work frustrations to travel plans to the kind of comfortable gossip that only exists among people who genuinely care about each other. I felt lucky, blessed, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The cake came out at 9, ablaze with 30 candles that Elena had somehow managed to fit on the surface. Everyone sang, voices slightly off key and completely sincere. The candles cast flickering shadows across the faces around me, making everyone look younger somehow, softer, the way we'd all looked when we'd first met years ago. "Make a wish," Elena said, her eyes reflecting candlelight. I closed my eyes, thinking about what I wanted. What did anyone want? Health, happiness, love? Success, the usual litany of hopes that we attach to candles and birthday wishes and shooting stars. But standing there in that moment, surrounded by these people, I realized I already had what mattered most. So I wished for something simple, something I thought was safe. I wish this moment could last forever. I wish we could all stay together like this, happy and whole. I blew out the candles in one breath. Everyone cheered. And that's when the lights went out. Not gradually, not flickering, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch on the entire city. The sudden darkness was absolute, swallowing the room and everyone in it. For a moment, there was silence, that heartbeat of surprise, when something unexpected happens and the mind is still catching up. Then someone laughed nervously. Breaker probably overloaded, Tom said from somewhere to my left. I fumbled for my phone, its screen providing a small circle of light. Others did the same, and soon the room was dotted with small blue, white glows, like stars reflected in dark water. I made my way to the window, phone held high. The city was dark too. Every building, every street lamp, every window that should have been lit was black. It was as if someone had draped a cloth over the world, snuffing out every source of light except for our phones and the moon, which hung full and pale in the sky, like a blind eye. "That's weird," Sarah said, coming to stand beside me. "I've never seen a blackout this complete." "Probably a grid failure," Marcus suggested, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "It'll come back on soon." We waited. 5 minutes became 10. The phone lights began to feel inadequate, creating more shadow than illumination. I found candles in my kitchen drawer, tea lights and tapers that I kept for ambience but rarely used. We lit them, placing them around the room, and the flickering flames created an atmosphere that was both cozy and unsettling, intimate and strange. "At least we don't need the cake candles anymore," James joked, but no one laughed. Something had shifted in the room. I could feel it in the way people's voices had dropped to near. Whispers in the way they'd moved closer together, seeking comfort in proximity. The darkness beyond the windows seemed to press against the glass, as if it were a physical thing, a presence rather than an absence. Should we try the news? Priya suggested. She pulled out her phone, but when she unlocked it, the screen showed only static, gray and meaningless. She frowned, tried again. Same result. That's strange. I had full signal a minute ago. Others checked their phones. Every screen showed the same thing. Static or blank darkness or error messages that made no sense. The devices were working, the batteries still charged. But it was as if they'd been cut off from the world. Isolated in a bubble where information couldn't reach. Maybe we should go downstairs, Daniel suggested. Check with the neighbors, see if anyone knows what's happening. I nodded, grateful for the suggestion of action, something to do besides sit and wonder. I grabbed a flashlight from my closet, and Marcus took several of the candles. We moved to the door, a small group, deciding to investigate, while others stayed behind. But when I turned the door knob, it wouldn't move. Not locked, not stuck, but immovable, as if it had become part of the wall itself. I tried again, putting my full weight behind it, but it didn't even rattle in its frame. "Let me try," Marcus said. He was larger than me, stronger, but he had no better luck. The door simply would not open. We tried the balcony next, thinking we could call down to the street, maybe see what was happening at ground level. But when Sarah slid open the glass door, we were met with something impossible. Where the balcony should have been, where the city should have spread out before us in all its darkened glory, there was only void. Not darkness exactly, but an absence so complete it hurt to look at. It wasn't black or gray or any color at all. It was simply nothing. A space where reality had been edited out. Sarah stumbled backward, and I caught her. We stood there, staring at that impossible emptiness, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a power outage. This wasn't anything that could be explained by grid failures or electrical problems. "Close it," Elena whispered. "Please close it." I slid the door shut, hands shaking. We returned to the living room, where everyone had gathered in a tight cluster around the candles. Their faces looked wrong in the flickering light, features exaggerated, shadows pooling in eye sockets and beneath cheekbones. "The door won't open," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the balcony. There's nothing out there. Nothing at all." "What do you mean nothing?" Tom asked. "I mean nothing."
No building, no street, no sky.
Just absence. Silence greeted this, the kind of silence that follows statements too impossible to argue with or accept. "So we're trapped," James said finally. "In your apartment. In the dark. There has to be an explanation," Priya insisted, though her voice shook. "Maybe it's some kind of hallucination. Mass hysteria. Maybe there was something in the food. Or it wasn't the food," Marcus said quietly. "And we all see the same thing. That's not how hallucinations work." "Then what is it?" Sarah demanded. "What's happening to us?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. We sat there, In the candlelight, 12 people trapped in an apartment that had somehow been cut loose from the world, floating in a darkness that shouldn't exist. And slowly, horribly, I began to understand. The wish. The birthday wish I'd made just before the lights went out. I wish this moment could last forever. I wish we could all stay together like this, happy and whole. Oh God, I whispered. Oh God, what did I do? They all turned to look at me, and I explained. The wish, the candles, the timing. It sounded insane even as I said it. The ravings of someone trying to impose meaning on chaos. But something in their faces told me they believed, or at least couldn't deny the terrible logic of it. Birthday wishes aren't real, Tom said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Then explain this. I shot back. Explain how we're sitting in a room that doesn't exist anymore, cut off from everything, trapped in a moment that should have ended hours ago. A time. That was the other thing I'd begun to notice. I checked my phone. One of the few functions still working. 9:30, it read. The same time it had been when I'd last checked. What felt like an hour ago. The clock wasn't moving. Time had stopped or paused, or been caught in some loop that trapped us with it. We need to break the wish, Elena said suddenly. There has to be a way to undo it. How? I asked. I don't even know what I did. I just thought the words. I didn't know they would actually. Think about fairy tales, she interrupted. Wishes always have rules. There's always a way to break them. We spent the next indeterminate period trying everything we could think of. I wished aloud to undo the original wish. I apologized to the universe, the candles, the cake itself. We tried rationalizing it away, refusing to believe. But the nothing beyond the windows and the stuck clock and the immovable door didn't care what we believed. And then we noticed the candles. They'd been burning for what should have been hours, but they hadn't diminished at all. The wax wasn't melting. The flames weren't consuming. They burned in eternal stasis, the same as the frozen clock, the same as us. This is hell, David said quietly. We're in hell. No, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We're just stuck. But there has to be a way out. There's always a way out. But as more time passed, or didn't pass, as we exhausted every idea and attempt, desperation began to set in. The mood shifted from confusion to fear to something harder and more bitter. People stopped talking as much. They moved apart, claiming different corners of the room, as if proximity had become unbearable. Sarah started crying at some point, soft sobs that she tried to muffle. Marcus paced endless circles, his footsteps creating a rhythm that became maddening. Tom kept checking his phone obsessively, refreshing the static screen over and over, as if sheer will could restore the connection to a world that might not exist anymore. I'm sorry, I kept saying. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean. Stop apologizing, Elena said, but not unkindly. It won't change anything. She was right. Sorry was just a word. Useless against whatever force had taken my thoughtless wish and made it real. I'd wanted this moment to last forever. Wanted to keep everyone happy and together. And I'd gotten exactly what I wished for, in the most literal, horrible way possible. We began to fracture. Arguments erupted over nothing, old grievances surfacing like bodies rising from deep water. James and David fought about something that had happened months ago, their voices rising until they were shouting. Priya accused Tom of having always been judgmental, and he fired back with equal venom. Even Sarah and Daniel, usually so solid, found fault with each other, their relationship cracking under the pressure of eternal stasis. I watched my friends, my loved ones, destroy each other with words, and I understood with horrifying clarity what I'd done. I hadn't just trapped us in a moment. I'd trapped us in a perfect moment, and perfection couldn't sustain under the weight of forever. We weren't meant to stay happy and whole. We were meant to change, to grow, to fight, and forgive, and move forward. By trying to preserve us, I'd created a prison that would slowly poison everything it contained. We have to break the moment, I said, cutting through an argument between Marcus and Priya. Not the wish, the moment itself. We have to make it not perfect anymore. They stared at me, comprehension dawning slowly. You wished for us to stay happy and whole, Elena said, so we have to become unhappy. Broken. No, I said, though the word felt like a lie. Not broken. Just real. We have to stop pretending everything is perfect. We have to acknowledge that we're not always happy, that we're not always whole, that this perfect moment was an illusion even before I tried to preserve it. It should have been easy. We were already fighting, already falling apart. But saying it deliberately, choosing to break rather than trying to hold together, felt like a different kind of sacrifice. It meant admitting that perfection was impossible, that trying to hold on to things as they are means losing what they could become. One by one, we spoke our truths, the small resentments and disappointments we'd been holding, the ways we'd let each other down, the cracks that existed in every relationship because we're all flawed and human and struggling. Sarah admitted she'd been jealous of my career. Marcus confessed he sometimes found our group exhausting. Alina revealed that she'd been thinking about moving away, starting fresh somewhere new. Each admission hurt. Each truth felt like a small death. The death of the illusion that we were all exactly who we pretended to be for each other. But something else happened too. As we spoke, as we let the perfect moment shatter, I felt something shift, a loosening, like a knot being untied. The candles flickered. My phone screen glitched, numbers briefly appearing before returning to static. The door rattled in its frame. Keep going, I urged. It's working. We dug deeper, past the surface complaints into the real fears and anxieties we'd been hiding. Tom talked about feeling lost in his career, wondering if he'd made the right choices. David admitted he was terrified of commitment, even with James. Priya confessed. She sometimes felt like she was performing her own life rather than living it. And I told them about the wish, Not just what I'd wished for, but why. How I'd been feeling increasingly disconnected. How I'd been worried that we were all drifting apart. That the life I'd built was less stable than it appeared. How I'd wanted to freeze us in place because I was afraid of what would happen if we kept changing. The candles went out all at once, plunging us into complete darkness. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but void and silence and the sound of our breathing. Then light flooded in, harsh and artificial and completely normal. The overhead lights had come back on. The refrigerator hummed to life. From somewhere down the hall, I could hear music playing from a neighbor's apartment. I ran to the window. The city was there, spread out before me in all its messy, glorious reality. Lights in windows, cars on streets. The ordinary chaos of a Saturday night in March. My phone buzzed with a dozen notifications, messages, and news alerts flooding in all at once. We stood there in the sudden brightness, blinking like people emerging from a cave. No one spoke for a long moment. We just looked at each other, seeing ourselves clearly for the first time all night, without candlelight to soften the edges or darkness to hide in. "What time is it?" Sarah finally asked. I checked my phone. 11:47. Almost 3 hours had passed since the lights went out, though it had felt like days or perhaps centuries. The world had kept moving. We were the ones who'd been stuck, trapped in a moment that couldn't breathe. The party was over. Everyone understood that without needing to say it. They gathered their things slowly, giving hugs that felt different now. More honest, less automatic. No one pretended everything was fine. We'd broken something tonight, but maybe that breaking had been necessary. Elena was the last to leave. She hugged me at the door, and I held on longer than I usually would. "Happy birthday," she said softly. I know it didn't go as planned, but no, I agreed. It didn't. "Do you think it really happened?" she asked. "Or did we all just I don't know. Have some kind of shared panic attack?" I thought about the nothing beyond the window, the frozen clock, the candles that wouldn't burn, about the moment suspended in amber, preserved until it suffocated us all. "Does it matter?" I said. "Either way, we learned something." She nodded, understanding without me having to explain. Some moments aren't meant to last. Some things need to break so they can transform into something else. And trying to hold on to perfect means losing everything real. After she left, I cleaned up in the quiet apartment. I threw away the deflated balloons, washed the dishes, packed up the leftover cake. The tres leches had separated slightly, the milk pooling at the bottom. But I ate a piece anyway. It tasted different than I remembered, less sweet, more real. I found myself thinking about wishes, about the stories we tell about them. How they're always warnings disguised as gifts, lessons about being careful what you ask for. But maybe the real lesson is simpler, that preservation is just another word for death, that perfect is the enemy of alive, that the only way to keep anything is to let it go. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Are we okay?" I typed back. Not perfect, but real. And that's better. She sent back a heart emoji, and I smiled. We would be all right, all of us. Changed. Maybe. A little broken, definitely. But moving forward, which was the only direction that mattered. I blew out the remaining candles. The ones I'd lit before everything went wrong. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling, carrying with it the last remnants of that frozen moment. And as I watched it dissipate, I made a new wish. One I didn't speak aloud this time. I wish for nothing to stay the same. I wish for change and growth, and all the messy, imperfect beauty of lives that continue to unfold. I wish for endings that lead to beginnings, for moments that pass and transform into memories, for the courage to let go of what was, so we can reach for what might be. The smoke disappeared into the air of my very ordinary apartment, in a world that kept spinning despite my attempts to stop it. And somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, marking the end of my birthday and the beginning of whatever came next. I didn't know what that would be. None of us ever do. But for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. More than okay. Grateful. Because forever is a cage. And I'd finally learned how to open the door. Story 9. I woke up in darkness so complete it had texture. Wait. I could feel it pressing against my eyes, filling my mouth when I tried to scream. My scream went nowhere, absorbed by the dark, eaten by it. Where was I? The last thing I remembered was driving home from work. Rain on the windshield. Headlights reflecting off wet pavement. Then, nothing. A blank space where memory should be. I tried to move. My hands hit walls immediately. Cold. Metal. Rough with rust. I was in a box. A cage. Barely large enough to contain my body. I couldn't stand. Couldn't stretch. Could only crouch in a position that made my muscles scream. Hello. My voice came out cracked. Desperate. Is anyone there? The darkness didn't answer, but it listened. I could feel it listening. I explored my prison with shaking fingers. The cage was maybe 3 feet in each direction. Bars on all sides except the bottom, which was solid metal. Above me, more bars. I was completely enclosed. A human-sized birdcage suspended in nothing. Time passed. I don't know how much. There was no light. No sound except my breathing and the racing of my heart. I tried to remember how I got here. Tried to reconstruct the missing hours. Nothing. Just that blank space. That void. Hunger came eventually. Then thirst. My throat became sandpaper. My stomach a clenched fist. I called out periodically, my voice getting weaker. No one answered. No one came. I slept in fits. Woke in panic, forgetting where I was, thrashing against the bars until my skin was raw. The cage swayed slightly when I moved, swayed like it was hanging from something. Chains, maybe. Rope. I couldn't tell. On what might have been the second day, or the third, or the 10th, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, walking across what sounded like a wooden floor. The footsteps circled my cage, around and around, never stopping, never speaking. Please, I whispered. Please help me. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what you want." The footsteps stopped, right beside the cage. I could hear breathing, smell something acrid, unwashed, old. A voice, when it finally came, was androgynous. Neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just empty. "You're here because you were chosen, because you fit the criteria, because the cage needed filling." Duh. What criteria? What cage? The cage that exists in your mind. We've merely given it physical form. Everything you're experiencing now, you've experienced before. In small ways, in quiet moments. The cage has always been there. We've just made it real. The footsteps resumed. Circle after circle. I counted them to keep my sanity. 100 circles, 200, 300, then silence. I was alone again. I thought about what the voice had said. A cage in my mind. I thought about my life before this. The small apartment. The job I hated but couldn't leave. The relationships that never quite formed. The sense of being trapped in a life that felt like it was happening to someone else. Was that the cage? Was this some kind of metaphor made literal? But the bars were real. The hunger was real. The darkness was absolutely, terrifyingly real. Time became meaningless. I tried to keep track by counting heartbeats. But I kept losing count, kept forgetting where I was in the sequence. The darkness did that, made everything slip, made nothing stick. I started to lose pieces of myself. Couldn't remember my mother's face. Couldn't recall the name of my childhood street. The memories were there, somewhere, but I couldn't reach them. The darkness was eating them, digesting them, leaving empty spaces. The footsteps came again. Different this time. Multiple sets. 3 people. Maybe 4. They stood around the cage. I could feel their presence. Feel their attention. "Subject is progressing," someone said. "Clinical. Detached. Memory degradation at expected levels. Spatial awareness declining. Temporal orientation almost completely absent. How long has it been?" Another voice asked. 17 days. 17 days. That couldn't be right. It felt like weeks. Months. "Years," I said. "Please let me out." "You can leave any time you want," the first voice said. "The cage isn't locked. It never was. You're free to go." I reached up, hands shaking. Found the top of the cage. Pushed. It moved. The bars swung open like a lid. Light spilled in, blinding after so long in darkness. I squinted, raised a hand to shield my eyes. Above me was a room. Ordinary. Bare concrete walls. A single bulb hanging from the ceiling. 3 people in white coats stood around the cage, watching me with expressions of detached interest. Clipboards. Pens, recording everything. "Come out," one of them said. I tried. God. I tried, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My muscles had forgotten how to work. My mind couldn't process the idea of space beyond the cage. I'd been compressed for so long that expansion seemed impossible. I reached up, grabbed the edge of the cage, tried to pull myself out. My arms gave out. I collapsed back down, whimpering. "Interesting," someone murmured. Physical capability remains, but psychological barriers have solidified. The cage has internalized. They closed the lid. Darkness returned. The footsteps walked away. A door opened and closed. I was alone again, but now I knew the truth. The cage had never been locked. I was imprisoned by my own inability to leave. I tried again. And again. Pushed the lid open, stared at the light, tried to force my body to climb out. Sometimes I got my head above the bars before panic hit. Sometimes I managed to get one arm out before vertigo made everything spin. But I could never fully emerge, never fully escape. The cage had become me, or I had become the cage. The boundaries were blurring. The people in white coats came regularly now. I could hear them outside the cage, discussing me, taking measurements, recording observations. Sometimes they opened the lid and shined lights in my face, checking my pupils, testing my reflexes, asking me questions. What's your name? I had to think about it. The answer was there, somewhere in the darkness, but I couldn't quite reach it. I don't remember. Where are you from? Another blank. Another void. What year is it? Time had lost all meaning. There was only before, the cage, and inside, the cage. Nothing else mattered. They seemed satisfied by my confusion, pleased even. They wrote things down and nodded to each other. The experiment is succeeding beyond parameters, one said. Complete psychological integration with the physical space. The subject can no longer distinguish between actual confinement and perceived confinement. The cage exists as much in mind as in reality. What happens now? Another asked. We wait. See how long it takes for complete dissolution of self. See if identity can survive this level of sensory, deprivation, and spatial restriction. They left. The darkness returned. But I understood now. This was an experiment. I was being studied. The cage was deliberate, purposeful, designed to break something fundamental in my psyche. I should have been angry, should have raged, but I couldn't summon the energy. The cage had taken that too. Taken everything except the bare minimum needed to continue existing. I started losing time in bigger chunks. Would blink and find hours had passed. Days, maybe. The people in white coats would appear and disappear. Sometimes they spoke to me. Sometimes they just watched. Their faces became featureless, interchangeable, parts of the darkness. My body was changing. I could feel it. Muscles atrophying. Spine curving to fit the cage's dimensions. I was becoming cage-shaped, molded by my prison into something that fitted perfectly. The lid was always unlocked. They reminded me of this regularly. You can leave any time, they'd say. The cage only holds you because you let it. But they were wrong, or right. I couldn't tell any more. The cage held me because I'd forgotten how to be anything else. Because the world outside the bars had become incomprehensible. Because the darkness was familiar now. Safe, even, one day or night or moment. I realized I couldn't remember what light looked like. Couldn't picture it. Couldn't even imagine it. There was only darkness. Had only ever been darkness. The people stopped coming. Or maybe they still came, and I just couldn't perceive them anymore. My senses had turned inward. focused on the small space of the cage, on the rhythm of my breathing, on the sound of my heart beating slower, slower. I thought about escape, tried to remember why it mattered. Couldn't find a reason. The cage was all I knew, all I'd ever known. The memories of before were like dreams, vague, unreal. Probably never happened. Time passed, years maybe, or minutes. My body had become part of the cage, grown into it, or it had grown into me. We were one thing now, inseparable. I heard a voice sometimes. My own voice, I thought, though it sounded foreign. It whispered things. You could leave. The lid isn't locked. You could climb out right now. But climbing out meant leaving the cage. And I was the cage. To leave it would be to leave myself. To become nothing. To dissolve into the vast, terrifying space beyond the bars. Better to stay. Better to exist in this small, known darkness than risk the unknown light. The experiment must have ended eventually. The people in white coats must have determined something, learned what they wanted to learn. But I wouldn't know. I was too far gone by then, too integrated with my prison. Sometimes I wonder if the cage is real, if it ever was real. Maybe I'm sitting in a chair somewhere, electrodes on my head, experiencing a simulation. Maybe I'm in a hospital, catatonic, lost in a dream. Maybe I'm still driving home in the rain, and this is all happening in the instant before impact. It doesn't matter. The cage is real because I believe it's real, because I can feel the bars, because I can't imagine existence without them. I tried to escape once, pushed the lid open, saw light, saw space, saw freedom, and I couldn't do it, couldn't leave. The cage had hollowed me out and filled the hollow with itself. There was nothing of me left to escape. So I pulled the lid closed, returned to the darkness, curled into the position my body had learned so well. Let the cage hold me. And I'm still here, still in the darkness, still pressing against bars that might not exist, still trapped by a lock that was never locked. The cage is in my mind, they said. They were right. But what they didn't understand is that minds can be prisons too. That thoughts can have bars, that consciousness can be confined just as effectively as bodies. I am the cage. The cage is me. We are one thing, indistinguishable, eternal. And somewhere, in a place I can no longer imagine, someone might be reading this, wondering if it's real, wondering if cages like this exist, wondering if minds can truly trap themselves so completely. They can. I'm proof. I'm the experiment. I'm the result. The darkness is complete now. No light penetrates. No sound enters. No time passes. There is only the cage and me, and we have become the same thing. This is the final stage. This is where the experiment ends. This is where I stay forever, trapped not by bars, but by my own inability to believe in anything beyond them. The lid is unlocked. It always was. It always will be. But I will never open it, because I am the cage, and the cage cannot escape itself. The darkness presses in, complete, absolute, eternal, and I am home.